Chapter 1, Operation, Elusive Fox in Shanghai. A lone figure walked down a dimly lit corridor of the clandestine facility on the outskirts of Shanghai. The black site factory buzzed with the low ambient hum of high-voltage machinery and the muffled chatter of guards changing shifts. Dressed in the uniform of a high-ranking security officer, the figure carried himself with an air of authority. Beneath a lifelike latex mask and a neatly trimmed wig perfectly resembling the man he impersonated was Hiroshi Kobayashi, an elite PSIA agent known as Elusive Fox. In intelligence circles, Hiroshi was a legend whose real face was unknown to all. He had infiltrated many such dens before, but this was the final ringmaster base, the last bastion of an international criminal organization spanning Asia and Europe. Hiroshi had only infiltrated this base a day ago, starting as a lowly grunt before quickly neutralizing and impersonating a series of higher-ranking personnel. Now he wore the identity of the facility's head of security, the fourth persona in 24 hours. Beneath the mask, sweat trickled down his brow, partly from the claustrophobic latex, and partly from the knowledge that his time was running out. By now, the real officers he had quietly taken down were overdue in their posts. Within a few hours, someone would notice 4 men missing, and suspicion would flood the ranks. He passed a pair of armed guards in exoskeleton-like body armor, giving them a curt nod. They straightened and saluted, oblivious to the ruse. Hiroshi suppressed a wry smirk behind his mask. Social engineering and sheer bravado were his weapons as much as any gun or Pokémon at his disposal. In his ear, a tiny hidden communicator crackled, once a subtle cue from Daisy the gardevoir that the security cameras in this hall were momentarily looped. Hiroshi pretended to adjust his earpiece as he thought to himself, "Perfect timing, Daisy." "Sir," one of the guards ventured, noticing the gesture. "Need any assistance?" "All clear here," Hiroshi replied in a flawlessly modulated baritone that matched the man he was impersonating. The voice changer tucked against his throat ensured that even his vocal cords betrayed nothing. The guard nodded and moved on. As soon as they were out of earshot, Hiroshi allowed himself a small sigh of relief, the kind that comes when a tightrope walk continues without a slip. Despite the calm facade, his mind was racing. He mentally went over his mission objectives one more time, like a mantra. Gather intelligence, acquire all data and technological blueprints that the Ringmaster organization has developed here. Sabotage, plant charges or triggers to ensure the facility and its heinous projects are completely destroyed. Rescue victims, find any prisoners, human or Pokémon, and get them out safely. Escape unseen, disappear without a trace, leaving nothing but confusion and a crater in his wake. Each point was critical. There would be no backup coming. At 20, he was already a veteran of solo Black Ops, having started this dangerous career at 17. The Ringmaster's network had fallen base by base, and tonight Hiroshi aimed to topple the final piece. The clock was ticking, but if all went smoothly, the fox would slip in and out before anyone knew what happened. Secrets in the shadows. Hiroshi made his way to an elevator at the end of the corridor, swiping the stolen keycard of the officer he impersonated. A green light flashed and the doors hissed open. As he stepped in, he caught a brief reflection in the polished interior panel. The face staring back was a stern, middle-aged man with a scar over one eyebrow. The disguise was so convincing that even Hiroshi almost felt that stranger's presence in the mirror. "Impeccable latex work as always," he murmured under his breath with a hint of humor, adjusting the collar of the uniform. Daisy's telepathic voice gently touches his mind, "Camera loops are holding. No signs of suspicion yet." Her tone was calm and reassuring. Daisy the gardevoir had been Hiroshi's partner since early in his career, a graceful Pokémon with emerald green hair and a flowing white gown-like body, capable of powerful psychic abilities. Right now, she was cloaked somewhere unseen, likely projecting an illusion or using her psychic powers to stay out of sight. Along with Alakazam, who lurked near the facility's mainframe servers, Daisy was discreetly fulfilling her assigned tasks. Hiroshi had deployed the 2 psychic types to suppress electronic surveillance and glean intel when needed. Their synchronized psychic link with Hiroji allowed near instantaneous communication without a single audible word, a crucial edge in maintaining the deception. The elevator descended smoothly to the lower levels where the sensitive labs and data servers were located. Hiroji straightened his stolen uniform and squared his shoulders as the doors opened to a stark hallway awash in sterile white light. A scientist in a lab coat glanced up, momentarily surprised to see the head of security emerging at this late hour. "Officer Liu? We weren't expecting you down here. Is everything all right?" the bespectacled man asked nervously, clutching a clipboard and a stack of reports. "Routine check," Hiroji lied with a perfectly measured nod. "Orders from above, no department uninspected." He strode forward with the brusque authority of a man who belonged exactly where he was. The scientist gulped and scurried on, his footsteps echoing away on the polished floor. Hiroji exhaled silently. Every interaction was a careful performance. "This disguise won't hold much longer," he reminded himself. As he moved on, the hallway opened into an observation balcony overlooking a large chamber below. Hiroji paused at the reinforced glass window and felt a surge of anger tighten in his chest. Below was something out of a nightmare, a laboratory floor lined with examination tables and containment pods. He counted several small, frightened figures, children, no older than 10, lying or sitting restrained as technicians hovered over them, adjusting machines and checking readings. The children bore strange markings on their skin, glowing lines of circuitry and tattooed identification numbers on their arms. Many had shorn hair, revealing surgical scars along their scalps or spines. They were dressed in drab grey hospital smocks that made them look like little test subjects, which, horrifically, they were. It was a scene reminiscent of a science fiction horror, as if someone was trying to create real-life Spartans from the old Halo video games. The Halo-like markings and half-fitted cybernetic braces on some limbs indicated the experiment was still in progress. "Not if I can help it," Hiroji vowed silently, eyes narrowing behind the mask. Cages lined the far wall of the lab as well, and inside each one quivered a small form, Pokémon. A Pikachu with matted yellow fur huddled in one corner, a cruel electronic collar around its neck emitting an occasional crackle of electricity that made the poor creature wince. In the next cage, a slender Dratini lay coiled tightly, its pearl-like eyes full of fear. Beside it, a sandy sand shrew trembled, digging its claws nervously into the steel floor of its cage. A tiny Pidgey with patchy feathers and a clipped wing let out a weak, sad chirp. And in the last cage, a bruised Machop sat with its back against the bars, a heavy chain binding its arms. The gray-skinned Pokémon glared defiantly despite the tremor of exhaustion visible in its muscles. The sight of these creatures, normally symbols of wonder and friendship, now battered and restrained, made Hiroji's blood boil. Pokémon were still rare in the world, technology had only birthed them a decade ago, and most were hoarded as tools by the powerful. Here, clearly, they were treated as disposable test subjects in the service of some twisted project. Chapter 2, Operation, Elusive Fox in Shanghai, 2. Hiroji clenched his fist inside his pocket, forcing himself to remain outwardly composed. He longed to smash through the glass and free every child and Pokémon in that lab right now, but a rash move could doom them all. Instead, he tapped a finger against his thigh, a subtle prearranged signal through the psychic link. Daisy received the message and responded immediately. "Found them. Victims confirmed, 5 Pokémon and 5 children," came her telepathic confirmation. Hiroji felt a flicker of sympathetic fury through the link as Gardevoir beheld the suffering below through his eyes. "Alakazam is accessing the network now," she added, her mental voice tight with restrained emotion. "They would have to act fast." Hiroji forced himself to move on from the agonizing view. He continued down the corridor to a reinforced door labeled Data Archives, Authorized Personnel Only. With another swipe of the keycard and a press of the officer's forged thumbprint, the glove he wore had a thin film replicating Liu's print, the door clicked open. Inside, cool, dry air whooshed out. The archive room was chilled to keep the servers cool. Racks of computer servers stood in neat rows, their indicator lights blinking green and amber. At the far end of the room, a lone technician sat at a terminal, earphones on, likely passing the graveyard shift by listening to music. The technician, a young man with bleary eyes, didn't notice Hiroshi at first. The agent silently closed the door behind him and approached with measured steps. Only when Hiroshi's shadow fell over the console did the technician jolt upright, yanking off his headphones. "Oh! Officer Liu! I mean, sir," he blurted out, eyes wide in surprise. I wasn't told you'd be coming down. Did something happen?" The screen in front of him displayed a matrix of surveillance camera feeds and scrolling code. He must have been monitoring systems, albeit inattentively. Hiroshi managed a thin facsimile of a smile, trying to put the man at ease as he walked closer. "No emergency. Just a surprise inspection," he said in a low, authoritative tone. "Carry on as usual." The tech nodded nervously and began fumbling to close out of a media player that was open on the console, confirming Hiroshi's suspicion that he'd been slacking. But as the feeds flashed on the screen, Hiroshi noticed something concerning. One of the camera views showed an empty barracks room, the very bunk room where the real Officer Liu and 3 other unconscious personnel were hidden, tied up and gagged. Daisy's camera loop had masked the hallway, but internal room cameras might not have been fully covered. On another feed, a security patrol in some corridor looked more animated, speaking into their radios. A subtle alarm was spreading. Perhaps someone noticed those men were missing from their posts or not responding. The technician in front of him might catch on at any second if he saw irregularities on those monitors. There was no time for subtlety. Moving in a blur, Hiroshi struck. His hand chopped down at the base of the technician's neck, hitting a precise pressure point. The man gasped once and collapsed forward. Hiroshi caught him under the arms and eased him silently to the floor, ensuring he was merely knocked out. The young tech would have a nasty crick in his neck when he woke, but at least he'd wake up at all. Elusive Fox took no pleasure in unnecessary killing, especially not of unwitting cogs in the machine. Working quickly, Hiroshi dragged the unconscious technician to the side of the room, propping him gently against a wall behind a rack where he'd be out of immediate sight. Then Hiroshi slid into the still warm seat at the console. Alakazam was already at work. The cursor on the screen darted from folder to folder as files opened and closed in rapid succession, seemingly by an invisible hand. Hiroshi knew his psychic-type partner must be concealed in some dark corner of the room, using telekinesis to manipulate the computer or interfacing mentally with the systems. A slight distortion in the air to his right like heat haze hinted at Alakazam's presence. "Good work, partner," Hiroshi whispered. He plugged a small device, a miniature data drive with a wireless transmitter, into a USB port on the console. Instantly, lines of code reflected in Hiroshi's eyes as his custom program executed, coordinating with Alakazam to extract every scrap of useful data. File after file flashed on the screen, blueprints for advanced weaponry, schematics of rifles with notes like armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating tank armor, and grenades described as micronized high-yield explosives. Another window showed designs for exoskeletal suits, powered armor frames akin to something out of a sci-fi army. Hiroshi's jaw tightened. These criminals had been busy. Then came the research logs labeled Project Spartan Gamma. As he schemed, his stomach turned. The logs detailed the augmentation of kidnapped children with cybernetics and even genetic splicing. One report coolly described an attempt to fuse mock-up muscle tissue with a human child's physiology to accelerate strength growth, with a note that the subject did not survive the procedure. Another mentioned harnessing a Pikachu's electrical sacs to power a human neural implant, essentially trying to give a child electrical abilities resulting in severe neural trauma. Photo attachments, which Hiroshi glanced at and immediately wished he hadn't, showed X-rays of small skeletons reinforced with metal and ceramic implants, and surgical tables with ominous blood stains. It was the Halo Spartan program twisted with Pokémon experimentation in a way that was beyond monstrous. Hiroshi realized that the children in the lab were intended to be living weapons, and the Pokémon were nothing more than component parts to these people. He gritted his teeth, forcing back a surge of fury. Focus. There would be time for anger later if he let it consume him now, he might miss something important or make a fatal mistake. Suddenly, a red warning icon blinked on the monitor. Remote access detected, security lockdown initiated, flashed in bold text. Someone elsewhere in the facility had noticed irregularities, perhaps a tech on another level saw the camera loops glitch, or a guard tried to call Officer Liu on the radio and got no answer. Either way, the base was starting to realize something was wrong. Alakazam reacted swiftly, trying to keep the system open, but the screen abruptly went black as higher-level network security kicked in. Alarm klaxons had not yet sounded, but Hiroshi knew it was a matter of seconds. He yanked out the data drive. It had captured a trove of evidence in time, now safely beaming its contents to a remote server beyond the reach of these criminals. They wouldn't be able to purge this knowledge to cover their crimes, the truth would see the light. Chapter 3, Operation, Elusive Fox in Shanghai, 3. Now for sabotage. Hiroshi reached under the console and retrieved two small, disc-shaped explosive charges from his vest. With quick hands, he armed them and slid them deep behind the server racks where they stuck magnetically among the wiring. A quick tap on his phone set a 10-minute timer on the charges. In 10 minutes, this entire archive room and the precious data cores of the facility would be reduced to molten slag. A part of Hiroshi wished he could be there to see the flames consume this evil place, but he had more pressing matters, the children and Pokémon. Casting one last look around the archive, his eyes fell on an open file still displayed on a side monitor, a communication draft addressed to Ringmaster Prime. It spoke of relocating the remaining experiment subjects by tomorrow, citing that Asia and Europe operations have been compromised, remaining assets will be consolidated, then eliminated if necessary to prevent capture. They were planning to destroy evidence, likely kill the victims rather than let the authorities find out. Hiroshi felt a cold chill at those words, followed by relief that he had struck just in time. They never expected the fox to already be in the henhouse. He allowed himself a tight, grim smile and slipped back out into the corridor, locking the archive door behind him. Unleashing the trap. Red emergency lights began to flicker along the hallway ceiling. The facility was entering lockdown mode. A droning alarm finally blared to life, casting the underground corridors in alternating crimson flashes and shadow. Over the intercom, a stern voice barked in multiple languages, "Security alert! Level B breach! All units secure your stations!" Hiroshi kept his composure, striding briskly through the halls even as scientists and staff hurried about in confusion. To them, he still appeared to be Officer Liu, a figure of authority. In a crisis, people tend not to question the guy who looks like he knows what he's doing. He used that to his advantage, moving against the flow of panicked technicians, heading back toward the laboratory block where the children and Pokémon were held. At the final security checkpoint before the lab, two armed guards had taken cover behind a desk, rifles in hand. They seemed on edge. One was speaking urgently into his headset, "Yes sir, Level B3 is isolated. We have orders to secure all research personnel in the safe room." "Understood." He glanced up to see Hiroshi, in disguise, approaching and gestured for his partner to hold fire. "Officer Liu." "Sir, we have orders to lock down this sector. There's been an intruder." Hiroshi raised a hand sharply. "I'm aware. The intruder might be after the lab subjects. We can't let them be harmed." He lied with confident urgency, "HQ says there's also a biohazard risk. We need to evacuate the lab immediately. Do you copy?" The guards exchanged uncertain looks. "Biohazard? We haven't heard." Hiroshi cut him off with a scowl. "Those are direct orders. There's a contaminant leak in the lab. We need to get those kids and specimens out of there before they're exposed. Protocol Zeta, full quarantine extraction." He jabbed a finger toward the lab door. "Open it, now. Or do you want to explain to the commander why you let our prized assets get infected?" "That did it." The mention of explaining failure to the higher UPS made the color drain from the guard's face. "Yes sir," he blurted, and rushed to the door, swiping his keycard and entering a code with trembling fingers. The other guard lowered his rifle, momentarily caught between confusion and dutiful compliance. The heavy lab door slid open with a hiss. Hiroshi moved behind the guard as if to stride and then struck with precision. In one fluid motion, he slammed the guard's head into the door frame, rendering him unconscious, and simultaneously drew the sidearm from the guard's holster. Before the second guard could react, Hiroshi whirled and pistol-whipped him at the base of the skull. The man crumpled without a sound. Hiroshi swiftly dragged both unconscious bodies just inside the lab and out of immediate sight, then let the door close behind him. The laboratory was bathed in the same red emergency glow, casting grotesque shadows across the medical equipment. The children on the tables were stirring in confusion and fear as alarms rang. 2 white-coated researchers were still there, scrambling to save their research samples and pack data drives into briefcases. They looked up, startled, as Hiroshi barged in wearing a security uniform. "What's going on? Where are the guards?" one demanded shakily. "Change of plans," Hiroshi said, deepening his fake voice to a commanding bark. "We're moving the subjects out, now. You two, assist with the children." His sentence was cut off by one of the children suddenly crying out in fear. The little Pidgey had started screeching as the alarms blared, which in turn set off a chain reaction. The Dratini let out a worried trill, the Pikachu's cheeks sparked in panic, and one of the younger boys on a table began sobbing loudly, terrified. The researchers froze in uncertainty. There was no time to continue the charade. In the commotion, one of the scientists spotted the guard's legs on the floor behind Hiroshi and realized something was wrong. "Wait," he began, reaching into his lab coat perhaps for a concealed weapon or alert device. He never got the chance. A flash of green and white swept past Hiroshi. Daisy appeared like an avenging phantom. With one graceful motion, the Gardevoir thrust out her arm and a wave of psychic force slammed into the 2 researchers, hurling them against the wall. They slid down in a daze, eyes rolling back, unconscious from the psychic blast. Hiroshi exhaled, tension releasing from his shoulders. "Nice timing, Daisy," he said quietly. The Gardevoir gave a small nod, her normally kind eyes hard with focus. Hiroshi quickly moved to the children. He pulled off his stiff security jacket, revealing the black tactical suit he wore underneath, and draped it over the nearest child, a girl about 8 years old who was shivering violently. Her head was shaved and a faintly glowing pattern ran across her temple. She flinched at first, unsure of who this stranger was. "It's okay," Hiroshi said in a soothing tone quite unlike the harsh bark he'd used moments ago. "I'm here to help you. I'm sorry I scared you earlier." He gently unfastened the leather restraints that strapped her small arms to the table. Daisy floated to another table where a boy, maybe 6, was whimpering. With a tender gesture, she used her psychic power to undo his restraints, the metallic buckles unfastening on their own. The boy's tear-filled eyes widened as he gazed at the ethereal Pokémon. "Are you an angel?" he whispered, mesmerized by Daisy's serene appearance amidst the hellish red light. Daisy gave him a warm smile and, for just a moment, allowed a soft golden glow of calm mind to emanate from her, suffusing the children with a comforting feeling of peace. The boy's crying quieted to sniffles. Meanwhile, Hiroshi rushed to each table, freeing the rest of the children from their bonds. Some had 4 drips or electrodes attached. He carefully removed them, hissing under his breath as he saw the raw wounds and injection sites on their skin. These kids needed a hospital, fast, but first they needed to get out alive. With the children freed, Hiroshi next moved to the Pokémon cages. Ivysaur emerged from Hiroshi's shadow without even needing a command. The grass type had crept in on silent paws behind its trainer the moment the lab door opened. With vines extending from the blooming bulb on its back, Ivysaur began deftly picking the locks of the cages. Hiroshi joined in, using a compact multi-tool from his belt to cut the wires of the electrical collars. He started with Pikachu's cage. The little electric mouse recoiled at first, sparks flying in fear. Easy, easy. I won't hurt you, Hiroji cooed softly. The Pikachu's dark eyes met his, wide and distrustful. Its body was battered, and burn marks from repeated shocks marred its yellow fur where the collar had been zapping it. I know you've been hurt. But I'm here to set you free. Perhaps it was the gentleness of his tone or the calming aura Daisy still projected, but Pikachu hesitated, then gave a tiny nod, or something approximating one. Hiroji snipped the collar off with a careful cut. The device fell to the floor with a heavy clink, and Pikachu let out a little squeak of relief as the constant stinging pressure on its neck vanished. In the next cage, the Dratini watched intently. Ivysaur's vines twisted and the cage door popped open. Dratini slithered forward hesitantly. For a moment, Hiroji was struck by the creature's beauty. Even injured and scared, the serpentine Pokémon's sapphire scales glimmered. He reached in slowly to remove a tangle of wires that had been attached to Dratini's small horned head. There you go, little one, he whispered. The Dratini blinked and made a soft humming sound, almost like gratitude, then quickly coiled around Hiroji's arm in a brief, cool hug. Reishu hopped down from the rafters where it had been hiding, ever since slipping inside behind Hiroji earlier. The evolved electric Pokémon chittered at Pikachu encouragingly, and the smaller mouse Pokémon responded with a weak but hopeful, Pika. They touched noses briefly, perhaps a promise of safety and friendship. One by one, the rest of the Pokémon were freed. The sand shrew uncurled and looked up at Hiroji with cautious curiosity. The agent gently scooped the sandy creature into his arms for a moment to set it down on the floor. Its tiny legs were weak from long confinement. Sand shrew sniffed his gloved hand, then managed a tiny smile, nuzzling it. The Pidgey fluttered out of its cage despite an injured wing, perching on Ivysaur's back. And the Machop stepped out last, rubbing its wrists where heavy chains had been. This Machop was clearly a fighter, even hurt. It stood protectively in front of the children now gathered together, as if ready to take on the world rather than be caged again. Hiroji gave the Machop a respectful nod. You're brave. But let us handle it from here, he said, recalling how the logs mentioned Machop DNA. This one might have endured horrors and yet its spirit remained unbroken. Suddenly, the lab door handle rattled violently. Bang! Bang! Someone on the other side was pounding or kicking at it. Muffled shouts came, they're inside. Get the door open. The metal bar Hiroji had wedged earlier to slow entry was holding, but it wouldn't for long, not against determined assault or breaching tools. Time was up. Hiroji turned to Daisy and Alakazam, who hovered nearby after finishing with the children. Plan Echo, now, he ordered, urgency sharp in his voice. Chapter 4, Operation, Elusive Fox in Shanghai, 4. Daisy and Alakazam exchanged a quick nod, and then each placed a hand forward. The children huddled together, eyes wide, and the freed Pokémon instinctively drew closer to them. Pikachu climbed onto the nearest child's shoulder, Sandshrew and Dratini wrapped near the legs of a couple of kids, Pidgey nestled in the arms of the older girl who gingerly held it despite her own trembling. In the midst of this, a radiant blue glow began to surround the entire group. Hiroji felt the hair on his arms stand on end as psychic energy filled the lab. Teleportation of multiple people and Pokémon at once was a challenging feat, but Daisy and Alakazam were masters of their craft. Whoosh! In a single, blinding flash of blue-white light, the cluster of children and Pokémon vanished from the spot. A couple of loose sheets of paper spiraled in the air where they had been, caught in the sudden displacement of air. Hiroji blinked away the spots in his vision. The lab was now emptier, only himself, his Pokémon team, and the unconscious scientists remained. The children and their Pokémon friends were hopefully now safe, teleported to the prearranged point far outside the base. Daisy and Alakazam had gone with them to ensure a smooth arrival and to guard them until Hiroji could regroup. That left Hiroji alone with the rest of his Pokémon to face whatever came through that door. Almost on cue, the metal lab door groaned as an explosive charge on the other side blew. The improvised bar lock blew apart and the door was kicked open with a crash. Smoke billowed into the lab, mixing with the red haze of alarm lights. Through the smoke strode a towering figure clad in a mechanized exosuite. The armor was jet black with crimson highlights, thick plating covering the man's torso and limbs, and a helmet with a visor obscuring his face. The suit hummed with power servomotors whined as he moved, and an array of blinking status lights ran down one arm. Flanking this commander were half a dozen armed troopers in tactical gear, their rifles raised. The lead man in the exosuite scanned the lab and quickly took in the situation: empty tables, unconscious staff, broken cages, and a young man in a security uniform surrounded by Pokémon. Even through the visor, Hiroshi could feel the commander's glare. "So," the armored man growled, voice amplified and distorted by a speaker. "The elusive fox reveals himself. I must admit, you had us fooled, boy." He spat the last word with contempt. "Impersonating my staff, making it all the way in here. Quite impressive. But this is as far as you go." Hiroshi subtly shifted his stance, one foot sliding back, ready to spring. The man in the suit was clearly in charge here, possibly the base commander. Hiroshi noted the ringmaster emblem painted on the armor's shoulder, a stylized ringmaster's top hat and whip. So this was one of the ringleaders. Two shapes slunk into the room at the commander's sides, emitting low growls. Pokémon under his control. On the left was a hulking Machoke even larger and more muscular than the Machop Hiroshi freed, with fresh anger burning in its eyes. On the right, a black-furred Mytyena stalked forward, lips curled to reveal sharp canines dripping with saliva. Both Pokémon wore thick metallic collars with blinking red LED lights, likely control devices or shock collars to enforce obedience. The Machoke bore scars across its chest and arms, and the Mytyena's left ear was torn. These two had seen many battles, probably as unwilling enforcers for the ringmaster's thugs. The commander raised a hand, and his troopers fanned out, forming a half-circle with guns trained on Hiroshi and his Pokémon. Hiroshi quickly counted them in a glance: 6 men, plus the commander with what looked like a heavy prototype pistol mounted on his gauntlet. Not great odds, except, he allowed a faint smile. They had no idea who, or what, they were dealing with. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Fox," the commander taunted. "Now you'll die in the light, and all your noble intentions will die with you." He gestured sharply. "Take him. And mind the equipment, I want the lab intact." All at once, chaos ignited. "Laren, front and center!" Hiroshi shouted. In an instant, Laren leapt forward from Hiroshi's side, the stocky, armor-plated Pokémon planting itself like a shield. Just as the troopers opened fire, Laren dug in with a fierce roar. Bullets meant to shred through tank armor pinged and ricocheted off its iron hide. Sparks flew as the hail of gunfire met the living shield. The force of impact pushed Laren back a few inches, but the stalwart creature held firm, shielding Hiroshi and the smaller Pokémon behind it. "Charmeleon, smokescreen!" Hiroshi commanded next. The red Charmeleon snarled and expelled a plume of thick, black smoke from its maw. The lab quickly filled with the acrid cloud, obscuring the line of sight of the troopers. Coughs and curses came from their formation. Through the chaos, Hiroshi could hear the commander barking, "Thermals on! Find that kid!" It sounded like the exosuite had thermal vision, but the heat signatures of multiple Pokémon in a tight space might confuse it, and the hot smoke itself would interfere. "Split and engage!" Hiroshi called his team. They had rehearsed maneuvers like this before. Each Pokémon knew their role even without direct guidance now. Reisha darted to the right flank, using the cover of smoke. Its cheeks sparked, and with a crackling ka-chow, it unleashed a thunderbolt that danced through the metal floor panels. The electricity arced up into two of the troopers who were unlucky enough to be standing on sections of floor grating that conducted the shock. They went down twitching, rifles clattering. On the left side, Wartortle sprang forward with surprising agility, his cannons, or rather, water jets, blazing. He took a deep breath and then exhaled a powerful water gun, not at the troopers, but at the ground in front of them. The high-pressure blast created a slick puddle. A pair of advancing guards slipped, losing their footing and colliding into each other. In that moment, Ivysaur followed up. From somewhere in the smoky haze, seeds shot out, leech seeds that struck those two fallen troopers and sprouted thorny vines, entangling them. They yelled, struggling as the more they fought, the more the vampiric vines tightened, sapping their strength. The Machoke let out a guttural roar, perhaps recognizing the meddlesome Ivysaur as kin to the one that had restrained it earlier. It charged blindly into the smoke toward Ivysaur's position, fists swinging. Ivysaur stood its ground, vines at the ready. When Machoke loomed out of the haze, Ivysaur lashed out with a vine whip, striking Machoke across the face. The muscular Pokémon barely flinched and counterattacked with a karate chop that smashed down. Ivysaur moved just enough that the blow glanced off its sturdy bulb rather than hitting its head. Even so, Ivysaur grunted in pain, momentarily stunned. Chapter 5, Operation, Elusive Fox in Shanghai, v. Seeing Ivysaur in trouble, Dragonair streaked overhead, the elegant blue serpent weaving through the air. Dragonair's eyes glowed as it conjured a crackling orb of electricity at the tip of its horn, a thunder wave. The orb launched and burst against Machoke's broad back, sending jolts through its body. Machoke's movements suddenly slowed, its muscles spasming. It had been paralyzed. Ivysaur seized the opportunity and blasted Machoke point blank with a cloud of sleep powder from the flower bud on its back. The greenish powder settled on Machoke's head and shoulders. Within seconds, its angry grunts softened to groans, and the hulking creature swayed on its feet before toppling with a crash, fast asleep. Hiroshi made a mental note to thank Ivysaur with extra treats later. Putting down a rampaging Machoke without lethal force was no small feat. The might hyena had circled wide, using its keen nose to hunt through the smoke. It lunged at Melodic, drawn by the serpent's distinctive scent. With a feral snarl, might hyena clamped its jaws down on Melodic's tail, trying to drag the sinuous Pokémon down. Melodic cried out in pain, a musical yet pained sound. Its normally beautiful eyes flashed with fury. In retaliation, Melodic's tail glowed bright blue and whipped around Aquatail, smacking the might hyena off with a forceful splash. The dark Pokémon yelped as it was flung against a wall. Not giving it a chance to recover, Swablu, small but brave, swooped in and flapped its cottony wings, releasing a flurry of disarming voice chirps that rang with fairy-like energy. The attack bewildered and hurt the dark-type might hyena, making it whine and shake its head in disorientation. Might hyena, its aggression faltering, scrabbled to its feet and bolted from the lab, perhaps deciding freedom without a cruel master was better than dying for one. As it ran, its control collar sparked. Maybe the commander tried to shock it into obedience, but the device appeared damaged by Melodic's water and Reisha's electricity. The might hyena disappeared into the smoke and out the blown door, effectively out of the fight. By now, only 2 troopers remained standing, and they were regaining their footing, raising rifles with grim resolve. The commander, in his exosuite, had lumbered fully into the lab, swatting aside a rolling tray of medical tools. He was searching for Hiroshi, his helmet scanning left and right. Through the thinning smoke, Hiroshi could now see the exosuite's full form, a bulky frame that made the man inside a head taller than normal, with reinforced plating. It looked like a prototype of a powered armor, probably capable of augmenting strength and carrying heavy weapons. On his left arm was indeed a mounted gun, a futuristic-looking pistol with a wide barrel, likely capable of energy blasts or high-caliber rounds. A direct hit from that could be devastating. "You pests!" the commander bellowed, seeing his men and Pokémon either down or fled. "Fine, I'll do it myself." He aimed the arm cannon at the nearest visible target, which happened to be Charmeleon, who had climbed atop a lab table for vantage. Hiroshi's heart pounded. "Charmeleon, move!" he screamed. Charmeleon leaped, and not a second too soon a lance of searing plasma sizzled from the commander's gun with a thunderous hum. The energy bolt seared through the space charm Leon had occupied, leaving a molten scorch mark on the floor. Had it struck, Charm Leon would have been vaporized. The realization fueled Hiroshi's adrenaline. This was now a fight for survival. In the chaos, one of the troopers spotted Hiroshi's silhouette and fired a burst of bullets in his direction. Tang! A shot clipped Hiroshi's shoulder, the impact absorbed by his tactical vest's armor plating, but the force spun him and he hissed at the jolt of pain. He dropped to a knee behind an overturned metal table, momentarily pinned by suppressing fire. The trooper advanced, confident, but he had forgotten about Wartortle. The feisty turtle Pokémon popped out from behind a toppled cabinet right next to the gunman and blasted a point-blank water gun at his face. The man gagged as water flooded his mouth and nose, and before he could recover, Wartortle cracked him across the helmet with a hard iron tail smack clang. The trooper went down, dazed or out cold. The final trooper hesitated, witnessing the formidable coordination of Hiroshi's team. That was all the opening Reisha needed from the rafters. It had scampered up a support pillar. Reisha let loose another thunderbolt that struck the man square in the back. He convulsed and collapsed, his rifle firing one last erratic burst into the ceiling. Now it was the commander alone versus Hiroshi and his Pokémon. But the armored man showed no signs of fear. If anything, he laughed a cruel, metallic echo. A boy and his circus of pets. That's what brought down my empire? Pathetic. He slammed a button on his suit's arm. With a mechanical clunk, the pistol's spent energy cartridge ejected, and a fresh one auto-loaded from a compartment. Let's see how well you handle this. He began firing wildly, plasma bolts turning equipment and consoles into explosions of sparks and fire. One blast nearly hit Melodic, who barely weaved aside, the heat singing the edges of its ribbon-like fins. Another bolt exploded against the far wall, blowing a hole into an adjacent office. The lab was quickly becoming a war-zone inferno. Hiroshi realized the commander was trying to flush him and his team out into the open for a decisive shot. They needed to end this now. His hand brushed against a cool metal cylinder on his belt, a flashbang grenade. Perfect. He signaled silently with a hand gesture. In an instant, Gardevoir reappeared at his side. She had returned after ensuring the children's teleportation went smoothly, and now she was back to help. Daisy's red eyes met Hiroshi's, no words were needed. Hiroshi pulled the pin and lobbed the flashbang high over the lab in the commander's direction. At the same moment, Daisy raised both arms and conjured a shimmering protect barrier around Hiroshi and the Pokémon. Boom! The flashbang detonated with an immense burst of light and sound. Even with their eyes averted and the protective shield, Hiroshi and his Pokémon were dazzled by the brilliance. The commander, caught by surprise, took the brunt of it. Arg! He cried out. Inside the helmet, he was blinded and deafened, if only momentarily. The exosuite stumbled, its systems probably thrown into brief disarray by the sensory overload. Hiroshi saw his chance. Laren, finish it, he commanded. Laren, still loyally stationed as a shield, now switched to offense. With a snort of steam from its nostrils, the stout Pokémon charged. Its heavy body, all steel and stone, barreled into the commander's legs with a brutal takedown attack. There was a horrific crunch as powered joints snapped and metal bent. The exosuite toppled like a felled tree, crashing onto its back and cracking the floor tiles. The commander groaned, trying to raise his arm for another shot, but the damaged servos whined futilely. Sparks shot from his suit's fractured leg actuators. He was down, if not out. With the face-off ended, Hiroshi was already running to the escape route he'd scouted earlier. Everyone, this way, he shouted. At the back of the lab was a reinforced hatch marked Emergency Exit Maintenance Tunnel. It was supposed to be a safety route for scientists in case of accidents. Hiroshi prayed it wasn't locked down by the security system. Alakazam, who had returned with Daisy, anticipated the need. Its spoon bent slightly as it telekinetically yanked a panel off the wall, exposing manual release levers. With a metallic screech, the hatch's lock released. Hiroshi and Alakazam hauled the circular door open, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. The Pokémon dashed through the opening one after another. Wartortle practically dove in head first, followed by Raichu, Ivysaur, and Charmeleon. Melodic and Dragonair elegantly slid their long bodies through. Swablu fluttered in, still keeping an eye on the commander from above until the last moment. Laren backed in, slowly walking backwards to keep facing the fallen threat until everyone else was safe. Daisy and Alakazam waited, ready to support Hiroshi as needed. Hiroshi was last. He spared one glance back at the ruined lab. The commander lay prone, helmeted head turned toward Hiroshi with hatred. "You think this is over?" the man rasped through crackling speakers. "Others will come. You'll never be safe, Fox." Hiroshi met the gaze behind that visor. In that instant, he considered stripping his mask and showing his real face to this man just so he would know who beat him as the last sight before his world burned. But Hiroshi thought better of it. Instead, he simply replied in a cool, almost gentle tone, "It's over for you. And I'll be there when it's over for them, too." With that, he slammed the hatch shut and spun the wheel to seal it. The commander's enraged scream on the other side was cut off, muffled into silence. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dark, illuminated only by faint red emergency strip lights along the floor. Hiroshi took off at a run, footsteps echoing. His Pokémon raced alongside or ahead of him, none worse for wear save for a few scratches and bruises. He tapped a control on his wrist pad as he ran, checking the timer, only a minute or two left before the server charges blew. Perfect. Behind them, the commander must have realized something, because a muffled voice could be heard through the hatch yelling desperately, "No, no. Kaboom!" The tunnel shook violently. A blast of hot air whooshed from behind, propelling Hiroshi and his team forward as if a giant hand shoved them. He stumbled but kept his balance, urging his Pokémon, "Keep moving." Dust rained from cracks in the tunnel ceiling. The explosion had been even bigger than anticipated. Maybe secondary explosions from power generators had ignited. The entire base would be engulfed in flames now, and likely collapsing. Hiroshi silently hoped the commander and his remaining men would have a swift end in the inferno rather than being buried alive. At last, a sliver of moonlight appeared ahead. The tunnel's end. A ladder led upward to a heavy grate. Dragonair surged ahead, coiling up the ladder and pushing the grate with its snout. The cover clanged aside, and fresh night air poured in. One by one, they emerged from a camouflaged hatch hidden among some bushes a few hundred meters away from the main building. Hiroshi was the last out, and he paused to slide the grate back in place, a habit of covering tracks. They found themselves in a small wooded area on a hillside overlooking the facility. The scene was dramatic. Plumes of black smoke billowed from multiple parts of the sprawling compound. Fire licked the sky. Even as Hiroshi watched, a secondary explosion burst from a side warehouse, presumably a munitions store cooking off, sending a fireball upward. Distant sirens indicated that the local authorities or fire services were alerted by the chaos, but they wouldn't arrive in time to save anything, and they'd have quite a puzzle on their hands when they did. Chapter 6 Dawn of Freedom. Hiroshi's chest heaved as he caught his breath, adrenaline still coursing. One by one, his Pokémon gathered around him in the cool night, eyes reflecting the glow of the burning base. They were all safe. He took a moment to kneel and pat Laren's hard head gratefully, his hand stung from the impact of patting that solid armor, but Laren closed its eyes in contentment. "Excellent work, everyone," he praised them quietly. They had done the impossible yet again. A soft cry from the woods behind him reminded Hiroshi of the mission's most important outcome: the children and the rescued Pokémon. He turned and made his way through the brush toward the prearranged safe zone where Daisy and Alakazam had taken the hostages. The forest clearing just beyond the hill came into view, bathed in gentle moonlight. There, huddled together under a tall oak, were the 5 children and the Pokémon they'd been imprisoned with. They looked startled by the distant explosions, eyes reflecting fear and uncertainty. But Daisy stood among them, her slender form emanating a calming aura that kept them from panic, and Alakazam hovered watchfully at the edge of the glade, 2 spoons raised as he maintained a faint psychic shield around the area in case any stragglers from the base had pursued. None had. The moment Hiroshi stepped into the clearing, the children tensed. To them, he was a stranger. The frightening man in a uniform and mask had vanished. Left behind in the tunnel was the latex disguise and voice modulator that he discarded. Now they saw a young man, barely older than some of the teens among them, dressed in a form-fitting black tactical suit, with a kind but weary face and messy silver hair. Could this really be the same person? Hiroshi raised his hands non-threateningly and approached slowly. "Hi there," he said softly, voice warm and gentle. "I'm the one who got you out. I know I might look different now. I had to wear a disguise back there." He gave a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe now. I promise." A beat of silence, then recognition flickered in a couple of their eyes. The older girl with the leg brace, perhaps 11 years old, spoke first. "I remember your voice. You said you were a friend." She managed a trembling smile. "You really are, aren't you?" Hiroshi nodded. He knelt down a few feet away, making himself level with them. Up close, he could see the toll of their captivity. The kids were pale, malnourished, with track marks from needles and bandages covering fresh wounds. But they were alive and free, and that was what mattered now. "My name's not important right now. What matters is getting you all home." The word home brought a wave of emotion over the group. One boy's eyes filled with tears instantly, and he bit his lip, perhaps holding back a sob at the thought of seeing his family again. A younger girl, the one who had called Daisy an angel, clung to Pikachu like a stuffed toy, burying her face in its fur. Pikachu gently patted the girl's arm with its paw, cheeks sparking softly as if offering comfort. Hiroshi reached into a pocket on his tactical vest and pulled out a small stack of cards. Each card bore a simple logo of a silver fox head against a black background and a phone number with an international code. He distributed them carefully to the oldest children, knowing they'd help the younger ones. "Keep these cards safe. They have a number that will connect you to my team. We have people on the way to pick you up, but if you ever feel lost or in danger, call that number. We'll get you back to your families, I swear." The 11-year-old girl took the cards with a trembling hand. "How do we know who to trust? What if the bad guys come back?" Her voice wavered. She'd been trying to be brave for the others, but now, free from the cages, the uncertainty of the world was hitting her. Before Hiroshi could answer, Daisy stepped forward gracefully. The gardevoir bowed her head slightly and then projected a warm pulse of psychic emotion, a feeling of safety and trust. The children visibly relaxed. The girl with the cards looked at Daisy and then at Hiroshi. "Your Pokémon, they really care about us, don't they?" "They do," Hiroshi affirmed. "Daisy and my friends will stay with you until help arrives. No bad guys will get near you, I promise." The boy with tears in his eyes sniffled and unexpectedly walked up to Hiroshi. He looked about 7. Without a word, he threw his small arms around Hiroshi's waist in a hug. Hiroshi stiffened in surprise. It had been a long time since anyone had hugged him so openly. Gently, he patted the boy's back. The child whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Angel." Hiroshi felt a lump in his throat. "I'm no angel," he replied softly, tousling the boy's hair. "Just a friend." The boy pulled back and looked at him seriously. "You saved us. You and your Pokémon. You're like a superhero, or a ninja." There was a faint spark of light in the child's eyes, the wonder of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary beyond comprehension. To a kid, perhaps this all did seem like a fantastical anime come to life. Hiroshi chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "Maybe a little like a ninja," he conceded, unable to keep from smiling. Now that the immediate fear was fading, the children's natural curiosity began to peek through. One of them, a timid boy with glasses that had somehow survived the ordeal intact, pointed at Reishu and asked, "Is that a Pikachu too?" "It's big, and orange." Before Hiroshi could answer, Pikachu itself piped up from the girl's arms with a proud Pika Pika, while gesturing at Reishu. Reishu sauntered over with a grin and flexed its arms comically, as if to say, "I'm the upgraded model." The children giggled at the display, an honest, heartwarming sound cutting through the gloom of the night. Reishu then went over and gently lifted its smaller counterpart onto its shoulder, giving Pikachu a piggyback ride. The sight of the two electric mice together, one clearly the evolved form of the other, drew ahs and ahs from the kids. Chapter 7, Dawn of Freedom, 2. Hiroshi realized this was a perfect moment for an important choice. He stood and addressed the Pokémon that had been rescued from the lab. Pikachu, still happily perched on Reishu now, Dratini, Sandshrew, Pidgey, and even the newly freed Machop who had stepped forward to join the group. Over the years, Hiroshi had seen that rescued Pokémon often bonded strongly with those who suffered alongside them, in this case, these children, but sometimes they also chose to join him, to fight back against the darkness that once held them. It was only right to offer them that freedom to choose their own future. He cleared his throat gently. "Hey, you all!" His voice was soft, carrying respect. "You're free now. None of those people will ever hurt you again. So, you have a choice to make." The Pokémon all gave him their attention, ears, tails, and eyes tuned in. The children watched too, sensing something important. Hiroshi continued, gesturing with open palms. "You can go with these kids, stay by their side, protect them, be their friends. They might need you and you might need them." He saw a few of the children unconsciously tighten their holds on the Pokémon near them, the girl cradling Pikachu, the boy gently holding Sandshrews' paw, the older brace girl with Pidgey perched on her shoulder, stroking its feathers. "Or," Hiroshi went on, "you can come with me. I could use strong and kind friends like you on my team, to help stop bad people and rescue more folks who need it. The choice is yours. I'll respect whatever you decide." For a moment, the clearing was silent except for the distant crackle of the burning base and the chirr of nighttime cicadas. Pikachu was the first to move. It nuzzled the cheek of the little girl holding it. The girl's eyes sparkled, and she hugged Pikachu tightly but then looked at it questioningly. "Do you want to stay with me?" she asked in a small voice, as if afraid to hope. Pikachu pulled back enough to look at her and gave an enthusiastic pika, nodding. The girl's face lit up in the most beautiful smile, tears of happiness spilling over. Pikachu's own eyes were a bit watery as it cuddled back into her arms. Hiroshi and Reishu exchanged knowing looks. Pikachu had found its person. Dratini had slithered up around the leg of the quiet boy with glasses. The boy looked down, meeting the dragon's gaze. He managed a shy smile. "You're so cool," he murmured to Dratini, perhaps remembering how Dragonair had saved them all. Dratini cooed softly and inched up, indicating it wanted to be picked up. The boy obliged, cradling the long, serpent-like Pokémon with both arms. Dratini flicked its tail happily and nuzzled into the boy's chest. It seemed this Dratini, gentle by nature, preferred the company of a gentle soul. Hiroshi's Dragonair watched from a short distance, its eyes proud and a bit misty, if snakes could cry, as it saw its pre-evolved kin find a caring friend. Dragonair floated over and gave Dratini a tender nuzzle and the boy a polite bow of its head, as if to say, "Take good care of my little one." The boy nodded solemnly. "I will," he promised, wiping a tear from under his glasses. The Sandshrew was next. It had been standing at the feet of the boy who first hugged Hiroshi, the brave 7-year-old. During the decision moment, Sandshrew looked between Hiroshi and the boy. Then, with a determined little waddle, it marched to the boy's side and climbed onto his shoe, peering up as if to declare allegiance. The boy giggled and bent down to pick up the ground type. "You wanna come with me, Sandshrew?" The round, sand mouse Pokémon smiled, as best a shrew can, and licked the boy's nose, causing him to laugh. That was a definite yes. Sand shrew curled into a ball in the boy's arms contentedly. On the other side of the group, Pidgey fluttered its wings. It had hopped down from the older girl's shoulder and was pacing in the grass, seemingly conflicted. This Pidgey had a strong spirit despite its injury, maybe part of it thought to fly free. The girl with the leg brace knelt, despite the difficulty, and extended her arm. "You can go anywhere now," she whispered to Pidgey, voice trembling. "If you want to be free, it's okay. Thank you for being with us when we were scared." Clearly, this girl was prepared to let her new friend go if it wanted. Pidgey tilted its head, regarding her, then glanced at the sky. It gave a test flap, its wounded wing still weak, but healing. After a long pause, Pidgey made its choice. It hopped back up awkwardly into the girl's arms and nestled in. The girl beamed, relief and joy on her face. "I'll take care of you," she promised, and Pidgey cooed softly, as if saying it knew she would. Finally, Machop stepped forward. This was the Pokémon that had shown defiance and courage even in captivity. It walked right up to Hiroji and looked up at him with big red eyes full of resolve. "Machop," it declared, puffing out its chest and then slamming a fist into its open palm. "The universal sign for I want to fight." Hiroji understood immediately. He smiled and nodded. "You want to come with me, hey? To help me fight the bad guys?" Machop nodded vigorously. It then turned and pointed to the children, flexing its arm as if to say, "I'll fight so they stay safe." It must have felt a responsibility for all of them, but recognized that by joining Hiroshi, it could prevent such tragedies on a larger scale. The children watched Machop, some looking sad to see it go. The little boy with sand shrew sniffled, "You're leaving, Machop." Machop walked over to him and gently patted the boy's head. "Chop," it said kindly, trying to reassure him. The meaning was clear, "I have to go, but you'll be okay now." Then Machop reached down and shook Sandshrew's little paw in a surprisingly formal farewell, and gave Pikachu, still with its new girl, a thumbs up. It was like a soldier parting from comrades, a moment both comical and touching in how earnest the small Pokémon was. Hiroji produced an empty Pokeball from his belt and held it out. "Machop, I'd be honored to have you on the team." Machop turned back to him, eyes shining with pride. With no hesitation, it reached out and tapped the button on the Pokeball. The ball opened, converting Machop into red energy and drawing it inside. It shook once in Hiroji's hand and then pinged. Machop was officially caught, or rather, had willingly joined him. Hiroji clipped the ball to his belt, silently vowing to himself that he'd help this Machop grow stronger and never let it suffer again. With the choices made, the dynamic in the clearing shifted. The children now had Pokémon partners by their side, ones that would no doubt become lifelong friends and protectors. Their frightened faces had softened, some even smiling despite the trauma, buoyed by the immediate companionship and comfort their new Pokémon provided. Hiroji rose to his feet, every muscle aching now that the adrenaline was wearing off. In the distance, a faint orange glow was visible beyond the trees, the base continuing to burn itself out. Sirens were closer now, emergency responders must be arriving at the outer perimeter. It was time to leave before awkward questions were asked. Right on cue, a pair of headlights blinked through the foliage. A sleek black van, headlights off to avoid detection, rolled quietly up a dirt path toward the clearing. The children tensed for a moment, but Hiroji placed himself between them and the vehicle, then relaxed and waved as he recognized the driver stepping out, a woman in plain clothes with a kind face. Agent Sasaki, one of Hiroji's colleagues from PSIA's covered operations, had arrived with the evac transport. Behind her, two medical personnel emerged, carrying blankets and first aid kits. "It's okay," Hiroji assured the children. "These are friends of mine. They'll take you somewhere safe." The next few minutes were a blur of gentle reassurance and organization. The children, now thoroughly exhausted, were guided into the van. The Pokémon clung to them or were carried alongside. No one was separating these newfound bonds. The medics wrapped each kid in a thermal blanket and started checking vitals, faces grim at the signs of abuse and experimentation but relieved to see them alive. Agent Sasaki gave Hiroshi a subtle nod of respect and relief upon seeing all 5 kids accounted for. Hiroshi nodded back, a silent exchange of "we did it." Daisy and Alakazam helped telekinetically levitate one boy with a badly augmented leg into the van, ensuring he felt no pain. As the last child was loaded, the 11-year-old girl with Pidgey turned to look at Hiroshi. "Thank you, Mr. Fox," she said softly. Hiroshi blinked in surprise at the name. She managed a weary smile. "We heard one of the bad men scream about a fox when you were fighting. And your cards have a fox on them. So, I guess that's you." For a second, Hiroshi didn't know what to say. He had gone by many names and worn many faces, but hearing Mr. Fox from the lips of a child he saved felt oddly touching, like a title he had actually earned. He found himself smiling. "Yeah," he replied gently. "You can call me Fox." The kids, huddled in the safety of the van's interior, waved quietly or murmured more thank yous. Even the Pikachu offered a respectful little salute with its paw, imitating something it must have seen Raichu or Machop do. Hiroshi pressed a hand against the van's frame in farewell. "Take care of each other. You're free now. Don't forget that." With those parting words, he stepped back and Agent Sasaki slid the door shut. The van's engine hummed to life, and with careful, lights-off navigation, it began to depart into the winding forest road that would lead them towards the city and eventually, home. Hiroshi stood there a moment, surrounded by Daisy, Alakazam, and the rest of his loyal Pokémon, watching the red glow of the van's tail lights disappear. He took a deep breath, inhaling the sense of night dew, smoke, and freedom. There was always a bittersweetness in these moments, the joy of a mission accomplished and lives saved, tempered by the knowledge of what those lives had endured and the dark reality that necessitated his work in the first place. He turned back toward the faint fiery sky, where the last remnants of the Ringmaster base smoldered. By now, the facility would be nothing more than charred rubble. If any of the criminals survived, they'd face justice soon. The data he'd stolen had already been transmitted to the authorities and to PSIA headquarters. Their whole operation was laid bare. This was the end of Ringmaster's sinister circus. He felt a light touch on his arm, Daisy looking at him with concern, her crimson eyes searching his face. Alakazam hovered at his other side, silent support in his posture. The rest of his Pokémon formed a loose circle around him, their expressions a mix of fatigue and devotion. Machop's newly claimed Pokeball twitched once at his belt, and he let it out. Machop emerged and immediately took a stance at attention, as if awaiting orders. Hiroshi chuckled and knelt to ruffle Machop's head crest. "At ease, soldier. You did great on your first day." Machop grinned proudly and flexed an arm, making Hiroshi laugh a bit more. The adrenaline ebbing away left Hiroshi's limbs heavy. He realized he was utterly exhausted. 3 years of relentless solo missions, and each one still drained him as if it were the first. But seeing those kids safe, it made every bruise and scar worth it. "Let's go home, everyone," he said quietly. "Or at least, home for now." For a wanderer like him, home was wherever he could catch a few hours of rest before the next operation. Perhaps back to a safe house in Shanghai, or maybe a debrief at HQ, then straight to another country. There were always rumors of new threats, new shadows requiring a fox's presence. As they made their way through the woods, Hiroshi couldn't help one last look over his shoulder. The first light of dawn was peeking over the horizon, a soft grey blue washing out the stars. Night was ending. In the distance, the flames at the base had mostly died, firefighters' hoses cast glittering sprays of water in the pre-dawn light. That chapter was closed. He knew that by the time the sun fully claimed the sky, he and his team would be just another set of phantoms fading into the day, their deeds known only to a few. But for those children and even those Pokémon, the events of this night would likely become a story of legend, how a mysterious fox-masked hero and his extraordinary Pokémon appeared from nowhere, freed them from the darkness, and vanished by dawn. A light novel tale coming to life. Chapter 8, Sanctuary in Shanghai. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of a modest house in a quiet Shanghai neighborhood. From the outside, the safe house was utterly unremarkable, just another weathered brick home on a narrow lane, with laundry hung out front and potted plants by the door. But behind those drawn drapes was a secret sanctuary. Inside, Hiroshi Kobayashi, known in distant battlefields as the elusive fox, finally enjoyed a few days of peace with his Pokémon. These were no ordinary companions, they were rare and powerful creatures, each one a treasured friend he treated as family. In the living room, the air was warm and still, scented faintly with tea and the remnants of breakfast. Sunlight seeped around the edges of the curtains, casting a gentle glow over a scene of domestic tranquility, albeit an unusual one. Reishu, Hiroshi's faithful electric type, sprawled lazily atop the back of the couch, his long tail hanging off one side and twitching occasionally. On the rug below, a sleek dragonair coiled her sapphire blue body in a loose spiral, watching the Reishu above with narrowed eyes. It seemed the dragon and the mouse had been competing for Hiroshi's attention all morning. If Reishu hopped up onto Hiroshi's shoulder, Dragonair would subtly slither closer and rest her elegant head in Hiroshi's lap with a contented sigh. Not to be outdone, Reishu would then scamper down and nuzzle Hiroshi's other side, shooting Dragonair a playful glare. Now the two exchanged comically jealous looks across the sofa, Reishu's ears flicking with feigned offense, Dragonair flicking the tip of her tail dismissively as Hiroshi chuckled at their silent tug-of-war for affection. Nearby, a Charmeleon and an Ivysaur were engaged in their own playful banter. The crimson-skinned Charmeleon leaned casually against the wall, the flame on his tail tip casting a soft orange light that danced across the room. Char, he snickered, eyes gleaming with mischief as he regarded the Ivysaur by the window. The stout, quadrupedal Ivysaur sat in a sunbeam that managed to slip through a gap in the curtains, greedily soaking up the weak rays on his broad green back. At Charmeleon's slight tone, Ivysaur turned and gave a low grumble of suspicion. The fire lizard grinned wider and teased him again, pointing to the wilted houseplant on the sill. It had drooped from lack of sunlight in their shuttered hiding. Charmeleon puffed a small ember from his mouth and motioned as if to singe the plant's leaf, implying Ivysaur might meet the same fate if he dozed off in that sunbeam. Ivysaur retorted indignantly, vines curling defensively around the plant as if shielding it, and himself. Clearly he took offense at the idea of becoming Charmeleon's roasted target. Hiroshi caught the exchange and shook his head with an amused smile. "Go easy on him, Charmeleon," he chided gently, running a hand through his own dark hair. "He only got 10 minutes of sun today, he's not looking to get barbecued." Charmeleon snorted a tiny puff of smoke in good humor, and Ivysaur gave a smug flick of a vine, grateful for their trainer's intervention. At the dining table, Melodic, a breathtaking serpentine Pokémon with opalescent scales, had half her long body submerged in a large plastic tub of water that Hiroshi had fetched from the bathroom. She luxuriated in it, sighing blissfully as the water rippled around her. "Mahalo!" she crooned, arching her elegant neck. Her pink and blue scales shimmered even in the dim light, though she clearly longed for a proper spa day under the sun. She glanced over at Hiroshi with pleading ruby eyes. If any Pokémon could give a puppy dog look, it was Melodic in moments like this. "Milotic," she trilled hopefully. Hiroshi chuckled softly, pausing in the middle of folding a stack of towels. I know," he said, as if understanding her exact request. "A nice spa treatment, right? Warm water, gentle scrub for those scales, maybe even some scented oils." With each phrase, Melodic's fan-like tail flapped in the water with delight, sprinkling a few droplets onto the floor. She nodded along eagerly, clearly understanding his tone if not every word. "We'll make it happen," Hiroshi promised, grabbing one of the folded towels. He walked over and draped it around Melodic's upper body where she rested on the floor, patting her scales dry where they emerged from the tub. We can't exactly visit a spa in public, but we'll do our own right here. How does that sound? Melodic closed her eyes and leaned into his gentle toweling, a soft purr-like hum vibrating in her throat. It sounded very much like gratitude. Across the room, perched on the arm of an easy chair, a little swablu ruffled its cottony wings at the sight of Melodic's impromptu spa. Swab, swab, it chirped, as though offering commentary on the whole situation. Perhaps the blue and white bird Pokémon found it amusing that the team's most majestic member could be so fussy about her beauty routine. Swablu fluttered up and landed atop one of the curtain rods, balancing easily and tilting its head. Ever vigilant despite the domestic calm, it peeked through a sliver of window not fully covered by the curtain. Outside, the street was quiet. A bicycle cart ambling past with clinking milk bottles, an old man sweeping the pavement. Nothing out of the ordinary. Swablu warbled contentedly, satisfied that their hideout remained unnoticed. Safety was paramount. Hiroshi was acutely aware that the sight of even one of these rare Pokémon could draw unwanted attention. In a world where only the wealthy or powerful ever possessed a single evolved Pokémon, Hiroshi's little family would be an astonishing treasure trove. A Dragonair, a Melodic, an Alakazam, and more. Any one of them could fetch a king's ransom on the black market, or serve as a living weapon in the wrong hands. To see so many gathered together, free and happy, was almost unheard of. Thus, the curtains stayed closed and outings were limited to nights or remote areas. Hiroshi didn't mind the precaution. These peaceful moments with them were worth 100 days in the field. Chapter 9, Sanctuary in Shanghai, 2. He carried a tray of assorted berries and puffins, little Pokémon pastries, into the living area, distributing them like a doting parent handing out morning treats. Breakfast time, everyone, he announced cheerily. Immediately, ears and tails perked up around the room. Wartortle, who had been dozing in his shell by the couch, poked his head out at the mention of food, his ears twitching. The aquatic turtle scrambled upright, his blue tail wagging as he trotted over to Hiroshi with claws clacking eagerly on the hardwood floor. Easy there, Hiroshi laughed, tossing a puffin into the air. Wartortle caught it deftly in his mouth and gave a muffled cry of victory around the treat. Watching from beside the couch, a sturdy Laren thumped his steel-covered front paws expectantly. The weight of the armored Pokémon made the floor tremble ever so slightly as he shifted in excitement. Hiroshi stepped over and placed a small handful of polished metal nuts and bolts, scavenged from a hardware kit, onto a dish on the floor. "And breakfast for you too," he said with a grin. Laren let out a rasping yet pleased sound, something between a purr and the grinding of gears, and eagerly lapped up the metal pieces, crunching them like hard candy. As Hiroshi made his rounds, a graceful figure floated into view behind him, levitating a few inches above the floor. Daisy the Gardevoir drifted serenely across the room, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea with the aid of her psychic powers. The white gown-like frills of her body swayed slightly as she moved. Despite the domestic setting, Daisy retained an air of elegance and poise, though that poise was currently being tested by the smaller figure stalking at her heels. Akemi the Kurla, Daisy's pre-evolved counterpart and self-appointed little sister, followed with arms crossed and a stubborn pout. She kept pace with Daisy, huffing as she tried to levitate the television remote control out of the taller Pokémon's reach. The remote wobbled in midair, ensnared in a tug-of-war between 2 psychic minds. Gardevoir! Daisy admonished telepathically, her mental voice audible to Hiroshi as a gentle woman's tone colored with exasperation. "Akemi, enough," she began, but Kurla was already leaping up to snatch the remote with her tiny hands instead, breaking the psychic stalemate. With an acrobatic twirl, Akemi landed on the couch clutching her prize and stuck her tongue out at Daisy. "Kurlia," she proclaimed triumphantly, clicking the TV on. A dramatic theme song immediately flooded the living room speakers. It sounded like the climax of some soap opera or idol drama. On screen, a dashing actor in a suit was reaching desperately toward a tearful actress on a rainy street. Daisy's crimson eyes widened. That's last night's episode, she sent emphatically, gliding forward in alarm. You skipped ahead. The Gardevoir's composure cracked as she realized Akemi had navigated to the recorded dramas on their device. Akemi, the Kurla, gave an impish grin and hugged the remote tightly. She teleported in a blink, disappearing from the couch and reappearing atop the far bookshelf to keep the remote literally out of Daisy's reach. From her high perch, Akemi chirped something cheeky in Pokémon tongue that sounded like a rebuttal. Daisy planted her hands on her hips, forgetting all about the floating tea mugs, which Hiroshi hurriedly caught with quick reflexes before they spilled. The Gardevoir narrowed her eyes at her little sibling. Young lady, we agreed to watch that together. Daisy scolded, her telepathic voice ringing in the heads of everyone in the room who cared to listen. No spoilers. Kurla only giggled and pointed at the remote, increasing the volume as the two actors on screen embraced in the rain. Daisy let out a dramatic gasp, whether at the on-screen twist or her sister's audacity, it was hard to tell. With a flourish, Daisy raised one slim arm. The television screen suddenly flickered and the image froze, courtesy of her psychic interference. Gardevoir, she declared aloud, as if issuing a formal challenge. Kurla stuck out her lower lip in a stubborn pout and refused to relinquish the remote. She waved her free hand, and the playback unfroze only to have Daisy freeze it again a split second later. The two psychic Pokémon fell into a hilarious battle of wills over the poor television. The show alternated between playing and pausing so rapidly that the actor's anguished face on screen began to jerk comically. Reishu and Dragonair momentarily forgot their jealousy to watch the spectacle. Reishu chittered in laughter, electricity crackling in his cheeks, while Dragonair hid an amused smile behind a coil of her body. Hiroshi could not hold back a laugh either. He set the mugs of tea down safely and then stepped between the feuding sisters. With one hand, he gently took the remote from Akemi's grip, lifting Kurla off the bookshelf and into his arms in the process, and with the other, he gave Daisy a light pat on the shoulder. All right, break it up, you two, he said in a warm, paternal tone that immediately softened both Pokémon's expressions. Akemi quit squirming and allowed Hiroshi to hold her, though she still shot a playful glare at Daisy. Daisy lowered her arm and let the screen return to its normal state, the paused drama now showing a single frame of two characters inches from a kiss. She gave an embarrassed huff, realizing she'd lost her cool. Hiroshi held back a grin. Seeing the usually composed Daisy get so invested in a TV drama was a treat in itself. He clicked off the television and handed the remote back to Daisy for safekeeping. You can watch your show later together. Promise, he said kindly. Daisy nodded, smoothing an imaginary crease in her flowing skirt and regaining her elegant posture. Kurla relaxed in Hiroshi's arms, already distracted by the plate of berry treats he still carried. She levitated one over and nibbled it contentedly, her earlier indignation forgotten. Watching all of this from a quiet corner was Machop, the newest addition to Hiroshi's team. The small grey fighting type sat on a folded blanket near the wall, one leg stretched out stiffly in front of him, wrapped in bandages. Machop's red eyes were wide and marveling. In all his young life, he had never witnessed anything like this morning's playful chaos. Humans and Pokémon interacting as equals, as friends, as family. For Machop, who until recently had known only chains and cruel experiments, the scene was almost surreal. Just days ago, he had braced himself to fight tooth and nail for a chance at freedom. Now here he was, free, safe, and surrounded by other Pokémon who laughed and played instead of cowering in fear. And at the center of it all was their human, Hiroshi, not a harsh taskmaster or indifferent trainer, but a gentle guardian who joked with them, fed them treats, and broke up their squabbles with patient smiles. Machop absently touched the fresh bandages on his arm, remembering how those wounds came from trying to protect frightened children back in that nightmare lab. The bruises and cuts still ached dully, but even that pain was a reminder of why he'd wanted to join Hiroshi. He fought to save the innocent human and Pokémon alike. Machop's determination to grow stronger, to help prevent what happened to him from happening to others, burned brighter each time he looked at his new family. Chapter 10, Sanctuary in Shanghai, 3. Lost in thought, Machip almost didn't notice Hiroji approach until he felt a warm hand on his shoulder. "How are you holding up?" Hiroji asked softly as he knelt beside Machip. His pale blue eyes were full of concern as he examined the Machip's bandaged leg. Machip straightened up and mustered a brave smile, giving a thumbs up with one three-fingered hand. "Machop," he insisted, trying to flex his arm confidently. The effect was only slightly undercut by the wind that flashed across his face at the movement. The truth was, he was still sore and healing slowly. Hiroji frowned sympathetically. "Easy there, tough guy," he said. "You've nothing to prove." Carefully, Hiroji placed his palm over a particularly livid bruise peeking out from Machip's shoulder bandages. Machip watched curiously as Hiroji closed his eyes, as if concentrating deeply. A faint, gentle glow emanated from Hiroji's hand, a soft green light that made Machip's skin tingle pleasantly beneath it. Warmth spread from that spot, radiating through Machip's tired muscles. The ache in his shoulder ebbed away, replaced by soothing relief. Machip's eyes widened in astonishment. This was no ordinary medical treatment. It felt almost like a Pokémon's healing move, yet it was coming from Hiroji himself. Hiroji seldom used this gift openly. In fact, only one other person alive even knew he possessed it, except all his Pokémon, his reincarnation gift, and he intended to keep it that way. The green light faded as Hiroji removed his hand. Beneath it, the bruise had all but disappeared. Machip rotated his arm experimentally. The pain was gone. Is he an experiment like the kids in the lab? The one who escaped the confinement for him to have the healing power of Pokémon? He must be risking so much just to use it openly. Machip's heart swelled with gratitude and something like reverence. This human who had risked his life to save him was now using a secret, gentle power just to ease his pain. Hiroji, oblivious to his misunderstanding, continued healing him. Machip bowed his head respectfully and managed a quiet, earnest chop. "As thanks." Hiroji simply smiled and ruffled the little Pokémon's crest of head spikes. "Anytime," he replied softly. "You're one of us now." Those words meant everything to Machip. He felt a prickling at the corner of his eyes. If he knew how to cry, perhaps a tear of gratitude might have fallen. Instead, the stoic little fighter quickly wiped his face and gave a determined nod. Hiroji rose, giving Machip a moment to compose himself. As he stood, he took in the whole room with a deep sense of contentment. These quiet moments, the laughter, even the silly arguments, this was what he fought for. For a world where Pokémon could live like this, not as experiments or weapons, but as friends sharing a home, a dream he and his siblings shared. A small smile played on his lips as he watched Wartortle now trying to help polish Melodic's scales with a towel. The turtle nearly tumbled into her tub in his enthusiasm, and Charmeleon sneaking into one of Ivysaur's sun-warmed spots by the window, only to have Ivysaur playfully swat him with a vine in faux outrage. It was a picture of peace that Hiroji wished could last forever. But peace, he knew, was always fleeting for people like him. As if on cue, a subtle change rippled through the atmosphere of the room. Daisy suddenly looked up, her red eyes shimmering. The gardevoir turned her head toward the front door a split second before a polite knock sounded from it. In the same moment, Reisha's ears twitched alertly and he leapt down from the couch, landing in a guarded stance. Dragonair raised her head, tongue flickering as she sensed unfamiliar presences outside. The room fell into a hush. After years on the run and in hiding, every member of Hiroji's team knew the routine when an unexpected visitor arrived. Hiroji's heart rate quickened, but he remained outwardly calm. Only a few people in the world knew about this safe house. It was unlikely that danger had found them here, but not impossible. He stepped quietly toward the door, gesturing with a hand for his Pokémon to stay back. Instantly, Charmeleon and Ivysaur were in front of Machip, ready to defend the still recovering newcomer if needed. "Alakazam," who had been silent in meditation at the kitchen's corner, hovered up and prepared to protect the group with a thought. Melodic sank low in her tub to hide her bright form, and Swablu fluttered down from the curtain rod to perch atop Laren's broad back. The little bird fluffed its wings, ready to vanish into Laren's steel-grey bulk for cover. Kurla Akimi clung to Hiroshi's leg, peeking around it with wide eyes. Daisy remained closest to Hiroshi, poised and focused. He could feel the gentle probe of her psychic sense extending beyond the door, scanning for hostility. After a brief moment, Daisy relaxed and shot Hiroshi a quick mental message. "It's okay." Familiar voices. Makima and Yashimura. Hiroshi breathed out, relief washing through him. Of course. He should have expected them. He'd been sending reports since the Shanghai mission, and word of his success would have reached headquarters by now. Still, he hadn't realized they'd come in person. He gave Daisy a grateful nod. "Stand down, everyone. They're friends," he said quietly. The tension in the room eased at once. Wartortle withdrew his head from inside his shell, where he had instinctively ducked, and Charmeleon's tail flame, which had flared brighter in anticipation of a fight, returned to its steady glow. Machop looked around in confusion. He'd only caught the tail end of Daisy's telepathic warning and didn't recognize the names, but seeing the others relax, he figured there was no threat after all. Chapter 11, PSIA. Hiroshi opened the door to reveal two figures on the doorstep. Makima stood in front, one hand raised as if about to knock again. She was a young woman, mid-20s perhaps, with a calm, commanding presence. Her auburn hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, and she wore a tailored charcoal grey suit that marked her as someone important. Sharp, ember brown eyes like those of a fox softened slightly at the sight of Hiroshi. Behind her loomed Yashimura, a silver-haired older man with a gentle smile and tired eyes that had clearly seen a lifetime of secrets. Yashimura was dressed more casually, in a simple sweater and coat, looking every bit the kindly grandfather if one ignored the subtle alertness in how he held himself. "Hiroshi," Makima greeted, her red-tinted lips curving into a rare smile. "It's good to see you, safe." There was a hint of emotion in that last word, relief, perhaps, carefully restrained. "Director," Hiroshi replied with a respectful nod, stepping aside to beckon them in. Technically, Makima had been the director of PSIA Intelligence Division, a joke of a division before she took over, long before he left Japan, but something about the confident way she carried herself now, and Daisy's earlier reassurance, made him suspect her title had changed. Yashimura followed with a nod of his own, patting Hiroshi's shoulder fondly as he entered. "Son," the older man said warmly. He had been Hiroshi's mentor when the young agent first joined the intelligence world, and even now he addressed Hiroshi with familial affection. As the door closed, Makima's keen gaze swept over the dim interior. She took in the curious eyes peering from behind furniture and the array of Pokémon cautiously watching her arrival. Makima was one of the few in PSIA who knew about Hiroshi's unconventional team. Still, seeing so many rare Pokémon lounging casually in a living room was extraordinary. An amused glint appeared in Makima's eyes as she noted Melodic's makeshift bath and Daisy's protective stance near Hiroshi. "I hope we're not interrupting a party," she said lightly. Hiroshi managed a chuckle. "Just a quiet morning at home," he replied. He gestured to his Pokémon. "You remember Daisy, of course." At her name, Daisy gave Makima a polite nod, a small, respectful bow of her head. The Gardevoire's eyes glowed softly for an instant as she murmured a telepathic greeting that Makima couldn't hear, but the gesture alone conveyed respect. "And Reishu, Dragonair. Wartortle, Ivysaur, Charmeleon." Hiroshi pointed them out in turn. Each Pokémon responded in their own way. Reishu hopped up with a little salute of his paw, Dragonair bowed her long neck gracefully, Wartortle waved enthusiastically, Ivysaur grumbled a shy hello, and Charmeleon flashed a cheeky grin. Laren stomped one heavy foot in greeting, earning a quick win CE from Hiroshi at the thought of the floorboards, and Swablu trilled from atop Laren's shoulder. Alakazam inclined his spoon-holding hand in a polite wave from the back. Even Akimi the gorilla, no longer shy now that friends were here, popped out from behind Hiroshi's leg to give a tiny curtsy. Makima's eyebrows raised slightly higher with each introduction. "You've expanded the family," she observed, her tone gently teasing but genuinely impressed. When her gaze fell to Machop still seated on his blanket, looking unsure, she paused. This one she didn't recognize. "And who's this little fellow?" she asked softly, careful not to startle him. Machop instinctively stiffened under her attention. New human visitors still made him wary. He scrambled to his feet, perhaps thinking he should stand at attention like a soldier again. Hiroshi stepped over and put a reassuring hand on Machop's back. "This is Machop," he explained. "He's new with us." There was a wealth of meaning in those words that Makima, being well informed, likely understood. Her smile turned gentler. She crouched slightly, bringing herself closer to Machop's eye level without coming too near. "Hello there, Machop," she said kindly. "I'm Makima. A friend of Hiroshi's." Machop looked up at Hiroshi, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Machop relaxed and managed a polite nod back to Makima. He didn't speak, but the fact he didn't retreat was a good sign. Yoshimura, standing beside Makima, gave a low chuckle. "You've built yourself quite the team, Hiroshi. I remember when it was just you, Reishu and Daisy." His old eyes crinkled with pride. He had known Hiroshi since the beginning, likely recalling a time when a teenage Hiroshi had only his first two partner Pokémon by his side. "They've all chosen to stick with me through a lot," Hiroshi replied, reaching down to scratch Reishu behind the ear as the electric mouse came up to his side. Reishu leaned into the affection and gave Yoshimura a friendly sniff, perhaps remembering the old man from past brief meetings. Makima straightened, business reasserting itself in her posture after the brief moment of levity. "We have a lot to discuss," she said, meeting Hiroshi's eyes. "If you're feeling up to it." She phrased it politely, but Hiroshi knew there was urgency behind her words. He noticed faint shadows under Makima's eyes as if she hadn't slept well in some time and a tension in her shoulders that belied her otherwise composed demeanor. Hiroshi nodded. "Of course. Let's go upstairs. We can talk freely there." He preferred not to discuss sensitive matters in front of the entire team, both to keep them at ease a little longer and because he had a feeling some of what Makima would say wasn't good news. He caught Daisy's eye and gave a subtle nod. The Gardevoir understood, she would keep an eye on things down here and ensure their conversation upstairs stayed private, likely jamming any listening devices as a precaution, though it was doubtful any were in a PSIA-maintained safe house. As Hiroshi led Makima and Yoshimura upstairs to a small study, his Pokémon resumed their gentle activities, the initial excitement of visitors fading into a calm vigilance. Daisy ushered the others to give their trainer space. Reishu hopped back onto the couch but kept one ear tilted toward the ceiling, as if listening protectively. Machop settled back onto his blanket, glancing up the staircase with curiosity. On the second floor, a door clicked shut, and muffled voices began conversing. Chapter 12, Summons from Tokyo. Sunlight peeked through the blinds of the upstairs study, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the air. Hiroshi closed the door behind Yoshimura and Makima, then motioned for them to take seats around a low wooden table. The study was sparse, just a few chairs, a worn couch under the window, and stacks of old novels and maps on the shelves. Hiroshi hadn't spent much time here, he'd only been at this safe house a handful of days. Still, it serves as a quiet meeting space now. Makima chose a straight-backed chair and sat with perfect posture, adjusting a manila folder she had brought with her on the table. Yoshimura lowered himself onto the edge of the couch with a soft grunt, absent-mindedly rubbing a knee that likely ached from old field injuries. Hiroshi remained standing for a moment, an old habit of readiness, until Yoshimura gave him a pointed look and patted the couch. "Sit, Hiro," Yoshimura said gently. "We're among friends. Hiroshi managed a faint smile at the paternal nickname and seated himself next to his mentor. For a moment, none of them spoke. The only sounds were the muffled bustle of the city outside and the soft tick of a clock on the wall. Makuma's eyes drifted to the closed door, as if she were considering how to begin. The Makuma Hiroshi remembered was always composed, always calculating the sort of person who would play out a conversation in her head 3 times over before uttering a word. But there was a tautness to her expression now that made Hiroshi's stomach clench with foreboding. Finally, Makuma broke the silence. "First," she said quietly, her tone composed yet carrying a weight that instantly sharpened the atmosphere, "I have some news. Official and long overdue." She drew a breath, folding her hands carefully over the thick manila folder resting before her. Her ember eyes, usually cool and unreadable, briefly flickered with something resembling dry amusement as they met Hiroshi's attentive gaze. "As of 2 weeks ago, I've been appointed Director General of PSIA." She offered a wry smile, but there was little joy in it. The first woman to hold the position, not that it matters, given the circumstances. Hiroshi's brow rose sharply in undisguised surprise. He was silent for a long second, processing the sheer scale of Makuma's revelation. He had known her as one of the PSIA's most capable and dedicated agents, someone who'd been instrumental in reshaping Japan's intelligence infrastructure. But Director General? She'd effectively skipped the entirety of senior management. She hadn't simply climbed the ladder, she had vaulted directly to the top, leaving every rung untouched. Struggling to keep his voice calm, he inclined his head respectfully. "Congratulations," he said sincerely, his carefully maintained expression betraying only a fraction of the shock reverberating through his mind. Yet Makuma clearly saw through the effort. Her smile widened slightly, a rare moment of genuine humor flickering in her usually impenetrable eyes. "Come now, hero," came Yoshimura's gently amused voice from the side, his worn features softening with a paternal warmth. "We all know you better than that. You can stop hiding your shock." Makuma nodded slightly, her lips quirking upward a bit further, clearly enjoying this fleeting moment of levity amidst the grim news she carried. "He's right, you know. You look like you've seen a ghost." Finally relenting, Hiroshi exhaled sharply, his carefully cultivated facade breaking completely as he leaned forward incredulously, the disbelief now unmistakable. "Okay, seriously, what the hell, Makuma?" His voice pitched upward with genuine astonishment, a frustrated gesture accompanying his words as he waved emphatically toward her. "You didn't just climb the ladder, you skipped the entire damn thing. You jumped straight from Director of the Intelligence Division in the Kanto branch all the way to Director General? That's practically 3 decades of promotions." He stared at her, as if waiting for her to suddenly confess this was all some elaborate joke. Makuma's amusement softened slightly, tempered by the seriousness of the situation. "Sometimes desperate circumstances require unprecedented measures," she replied coolly, though there was clear acknowledgement of the absurdity of her rapid assent. There was no one left who could be trusted fully. The agency's upper ranks had become a nest of vipers, too many compromised, too many playing dangerous games. Her voice took on a colder edge, a flicker of righteous anger briefly surfacing. "So, the Prime Minister took drastic action. He needed someone who had proven their dedication beyond doubt. Someone with results, loyalty, and more importantly someone willing to clean house. My appointment wasn't just recognition, it was a necessity." Hiroshi sat back heavily, exhaling a long breath. He couldn't argue with that logic. Makuma's integrity and competence were unquestionable, still, the sheer audacity of the move stunned him. Yoshimura, perhaps sensing Hiroshi's lingering disbelief, spoke softly, "She earned it, Hiroshi. After everything that's happened these last few years, after all the leaks, betrayals, and internal politics, Makuma has been the only constant, stable presence we've had." His eyes crinkled warmly, pride radiating gently from the elderly mentor. This was inevitable, even if it happened far sooner than anyone anticipated. Hiroshi nodded slowly, allowing himself to absorb this properly. Well, if anyone could leapfrog their way to the top and not completely screw it up, it's you. His voice softened, genuine respect coloring his words. You deserve it, Makima. Truly. Makima's smile warmed a fraction at their support, but it quickly fell away. Thank you. But I wish I came with better news. She opened the folder on the table, revealing a stack of documents reports stamped with various clearances, some photographs paper-clipped to pages of text. Hiroshi caught a glimpse of one photo and felt his heart drop. Chapter 13, Summons from Tokyo, 2. It showed a ransacked laboratory room, cages overturned and empty. In another picture beneath it, an entire row of pokeballs lay scattered and smashed on a concrete floor. Makima tapped the thick folder resting heavily on the table between them, her expression darkening further. Her amber eyes narrowed slightly, a storm simmering beneath her composed exterior. 23 days ago, she began, her voice carrying a sharp, controlled tension. The entire Kanto Pokémon research lab was emptied overnight. She paused deliberately, allowing Hiroshi a moment to absorb the gravity of her words. Every single Pokémon, every egg, specimen, file, piece of research, all of it, gone. Vanished without a trace. Hiroshi's eyes widened in shock, a cold chill slithering down his spine. The Kanto Pokémon Research Lab wasn't just any facility, it was Japan's crown jewel, their central repository of Pokémon-related research and the nation's most secure biological compound. Every Pokémon in the facility was precious beyond measure, among the last significant collections remaining in the entire country. The loss was almost unthinkable. Emptied. Hiroshi repeated incredulously, struggling to process what he was hearing. His voice was tight, almost hoarse. How is that possible? That place was guarded like a fortress. By whom? How? Makima's jaw tightened visibly, her fingers clenching around the folder's edge. A spark of anger flashed briefly through her normally controlled gaze, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a brittle edge. It was an inside job, she spat out bitterly, as if each word left a sour taste. Our own people, former directors, senior agents, even some top-level researchers within the PSIA. People who swore to protect Japan. They betrayed us all. Beside her, Yoshimura let out a deep, weary sigh, his shoulders slumping visibly as if the weight of that betrayal pressed physically upon him. His usually calm expression twisted with deep sorrow, as if each word reopened old wounds. Hiroshi felt as though he'd been struck physically, an ache settling deep into his chest. The idea of betrayal from within the very agency he'd once served with his life felt almost too bitter to swallow. These weren't faceless criminals, they were colleagues he'd trusted, people he'd shared meals with, fought alongside, even trained himself. The enormity of their treason struck him like a physical blow. But, why? He asked, barely keeping his voice steady. The possibilities were grim: greed, power, political leverage, but he needed to hear it. Why would they do this? Pokémon are rare enough already, stealing every single one of Japan's last batch seems impossible without an immense motive. Makima glanced at Yoshimura, who gave her a grim nod, prompting her to continue. She turned back to Hiroshi, her eyes flaring with cold fury as she spoke. They disguised it as a classified retrieval mission, a black ops operation under the pretense of national security. Officially, it never even existed, every file meticulously redacted, authorization signatures forged. Even the Prime Minister was completely unaware. It was meticulously planned, executed swiftly and silently by people who knew exactly how to bypass every safeguard. She hesitated, visibly shaken, before adding darkly, and it's worse than simple theft. They didn't just take Pokémon, they abducted the agents loyal to them, emptied our research databases, wiped surveillance records clean. Every piece of evidence, every digital footprint, completely scrubbed. They knew exactly how we would respond and deliberately made themselves untraceable. Our own Director General, my predecessor, led this betrayal. He disappeared along with the entire operation team, their agents, the Pokémon. Not a single trace left behind. Hiroshi stared in stunned silence, his fists tightening on his knees until his knuckles went white. A former director general, someone entrusted at the highest level, orchestrating this betrayal. It wasn't just criminal, it was catastrophic. Foreign assistance? Hiroshi asked grimly, his analytical instincts kicking in even through his shock. Such a massive operation couldn't have been executed without outside support. Private military, corporate espionage. Makima nodded gravely. Undoubtedly. Our early intel suggests private military contractors were involved, likely funded through covered international channels. We've intercepted some encrypted chatter indicating potential foreign entities, but nothing solid yet. Whoever assisted had vast resources, logistical expertise, and possibly advanced technological capabilities. Yet they've all vanished without a trace. No electronic communications, no financial trails. Even our international partners have found nothing tangible. It's as if an entire operation just evaporated overnight. Yoshimura spoke for the first time since Makima had begun explaining, his voice heavy with fatigue and sorrow. This betrayal wasn't just about money or simple greed, Hiroshi. They're likely planning something far bigger. The stolen Pokémon alone are invaluable, but combine that with the research they took, genetic data, breeding methods, behavioral analysis, it all points to a larger, coordinated strategy. Possibly weapons development, maybe black market genetic engineering programs, or worse. Makima closed the folder sharply, her composure cracking slightly, revealing the depth of her disgust. The truth is, we don't yet know their full intentions. But one thing is clear, they have effectively crippled Japan's capability to participate in global Pokémon research and development. Yoshimura interlaced his fingers and spoke softly, after that, the international community is, well, mocking us would be putting it lightly. For years, our intelligence services have been looked down on, seen as bumbling and behind the times. We were finally starting to regain some respect, thanks to Makima's reforms and the successes you and your trainees had. He trailed off, shaking his head. Makima picked up, her tone measured but carrying a hard edge. Now, Japan's intelligence community is in disarray. Again. An international joke, just when we'd begun to turn things around. Other countries are wondering if we can't even safeguard our own assets. What good are we? Some of our allies have quietly started to exclude us from intel sharing on global Pokémon trafficking because they think we're compromised. She pressed her fingertips together, a gesture Hiroshi recognized as her way of containing frustration. And they're not entirely wrong. We were compromised from within. Makima leaned forward, her amber brown eyes locking firmly onto Hiroshi's hesitant gaze. Her voice, normally cool and controlled, carried a rare, emotional urgency. That's exactly why I'm here, Hiroshi. Japan needs you, PSIA needs you. I want you back in Tokyo, to help us rebuild what's been broken. She took a measured breath, weighing her next words carefully. I'm asking you no, begging you to return as assistant director of the Kanto branch. Honestly, I pushed for you to be the branch director itself, but you're barely 20, Hiroshi. Officially, it's assistant director, but realistically, you'll be running things. There's no one else to take that mantle. Hiroshi stared at her, stunned into momentary silence. Then a bitter, incredulous laugh broke from his throat, startling both Makima and Yoshimura. He shook his head slowly, eyes narrowed in skeptical amusement. Assistant director, he echoed, disbelief clear in his voice. Seriously, Makima? Don't throw decades worth of promotions at me out of nowhere like you suddenly got. What the hell's going on back in Tokyo? His laughter faded abruptly, replaced by an uneasy silence, heavy and stifling. Makima held his gaze steadily, but Hiroshi felt her sympathy, her understanding. He resented that empathy now, knowing what it dredged from his past. Chapter 14, Summons from Tokyo, 3. He let out a slow, ragged breath, shoulders sagging slightly as memories clawed at the edges of his consciousness. Anger rose first, sharp and familiar, at the traitors within PSIA who had undone all their careful, painstaking progress. Yet beneath that anger, a deeper ache burned. A grief he thought he'd buried in the scorched sands of Iraq. Makama, he started quietly, turning his gaze downward to his trembling hands, clasped tightly in his lap. You know I left Tokyo for a reason. After Iraq, I told myself I didn't deserve to come back. You could call it self-imposed exile if you want a punishment, maybe. But it was necessary. He paused, swallowing hard, and the silence in the room felt oppressive. Yoshimura opened his mouth as if to gently interrupt, but Hiroshi pressed on, voice lower, heavier. It's more than just the mission, he murmured. It's Tokyo itself. It's filled with memories of what used to be normal memories of my mother, my family. Just stepping back into that city drags me into the past, back to that day, back to that failure, every single moment that led to it. Makama leaned closer, sensing Hiroshi teetering on the edge of memories he tried so desperately to suppress. She spoke softly, yet her words carried the firmness of absolute conviction. What Ringmaster did was never your fault, Hiroshi. You can't blame yourself for simply living a normal life for existing. Neither you nor your siblings nor your mother deserved anything that happened. You did everything you possibly could under impossible circumstances, with zero organizational support. Her voice sharpened with passion, the depth of her conviction clear. You were phenomenal in Iraq. Anyone else would have been destroyed by it. But you survived, and more than that, you've been fighting every day since. You have every right to return. Hiroshi visibly flinched at the mere mention of Iraq, his jaw clenching so tightly it trembled. He shut his eyes momentarily, desperately attempting to push away flashes of memories, flickering scenes he could never erase fully, no matter how far he ran. A dry, dusty roadside beneath an oppressive sun. Voices crackling frantically through a malfunctioning radio, screams piercing the desert air, and then suddenly, terribly, a mushroom cloud rising silently on the horizon, dwarfing everything beneath its horrific brilliance. His ears had rung painfully for days afterward, the shockwave imprinting itself deep into his bones. Did I? Hiroshi snapped, then immediately shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I replay it every night, Yoshimura. How I could have saved them, how I should have seen it coming. Only if I wore that damn suit early. A heavy silence filled the room. Makama looked down, her expression pained. She had lost people too in her career, he knew. She gave him a moment, then spoke gently but firmly. We can't change what happened, Makama said. But we can't let it paralyze us, either. I won't pretend to know exactly how you feel, but I do know this, Japan needs you, Hiroshi. Now more than ever. She reached out and carefully slid one of the photographs from the folder toward him. It was an image of a vast empty habitat enclosure at the Kanto lab, a place that should have been teeming with life now utterly barren. All those Pokémon, if we don't get them back, who knows what fate awaits them. And the agents who did this, they're still out there. They betrayed us all. They betrayed you. Hiroshi stared at the photo. He thought of the Pikachu with the shock collar in Shanghai, of Machop chained in a cage. He imagined the stolen Pokémon, perhaps stuffed into crates or sold to the highest bidder, or subjected to experiments like the ones he'd just stopped. A slow fire lit behind his rib cage, not the reckless blaze of guilt, but a focused, righteous anger at injustice. Injustice everyone he loved fought for and failed. Yet still he hesitated, the weight of his past failure heavy on his shoulders. Even if I wanted to come back, after everything, do I have that right? To lead again, he asked hoarsely. He wasn't sure if he was asking Makama or himself. Makama leaned closer and laid her hand gently atop his clenched fist. It was a rare show of personal warmth from her. Yes, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. You do. Hiroshi, you're the best field agent we have. You're also one of the only people left that so many of us trust. She managed a faint smile. Including me. Especially me. Yoshimura nodded firmly. Listen to her, hero. She's got a point. There's no one better to help fix this mess. Not in Tokyo, not anywhere. Hiroshi looked between them, his mentor and his closest colleague both gazing back with absolute conviction. Two of the few people left in this world whom he truly trusted, now standing before him, asking him to take on a burden heavier than any he'd carried in years. Part of him wished fiercely to remain hidden away in this small Shanghai safe house, living quietly with his Pokémon, his family. Here, there were no shadows of past failures, no ghosts whispering accusations in the dark. Here, he could pretend the world outside no longer needed the fox, that someone else could shoulder the weight instead. But another part, the restless spirit that had driven him to take impossible risks, to infiltrate bases no one else dared approach, to rescue Pokémon from fates worse than death, was stirring again, clawing its way back toward the surface. Makima leaned forward gently, her eyes capturing his attention with quiet urgency. I have the Prime Minister's ear now, she continued, her tone softer yet deeply compelling. He trusts my judgment, especially after seeing what a small, highly effective team can accomplish, the things you and I managed together. In just 3 years, Hiroshi, you dismantled Ringmaster, an organization so powerful that the CIA couldn't even begin to touch it. The world's strongest intelligence agencies either feared or secretly negotiated with them, but you and your students managed not only to tear it down, but also to rescue hundreds of Pokémon and countless children in the process. Her voice held genuine pride, but also a careful gentleness, knowing how heavy these victories had weighed on him. The cabinet wasn't pleased when you insisted on releasing most of those Pokémon to the rescued children instead of turning them into government assets, Makima acknowledged softly. But I ensured the children understood they must live discreetly, that they must protect their Pokémon partners carefully. We provided Pokeballs to conceal them when necessary, taught them how to blend in. It's been discreet so far, but successful. She paused, allowing her words to fully register, watching carefully as the gears turned behind Hiroshi's eyes. Seeing she had his complete attention, she continued, her voice brimming with quiet conviction, when I explained to the Prime Minister about changing our approach to Pokémon to finally end the cruel methods that even we have used, he genuinely listened. For the first time, Hiroshi, Japan is ready to adopt a truly compassionate Pokémon policy, one that aligns completely with your long-held beliefs. Hiroshi's head snapped upward, eyes wide with shock and cautious hope. For years, he'd waged silent battles against the cruelty of shock collars, cramped Pokeballs, forced obedience, and ruthless experimentation. He'd fought hard, endured countless reprimands, endured being labeled insubordinate or idealistic. And now, hearing this from Makima felt surreal, almost too good to be true. He barely managed to whisper, really? Makima met his gaze evenly, her expression firm and unwavering. Really, she confirmed quietly. The Prime Minister himself will announce it soon, but it begins with us. PSIA will be the first to adopt this new policy as an example to other departments. She paused, voice lowering thoughtfully. The incident in Johannesburg, the psychic Pokémon's retaliation and the resulting chaos helped illustrate to the world just how broken our old system is. People finally saw the danger of trying to force Pokémon obedience through pain and control. Hiroshi's eyes briefly darkened, recalling that incident only vaguely. He'd heard whispers, reports from a distance about a psychic-type Pokémon driven to madness, its terrible retribution against humans who abused and tormented it. The devastation had left thousands dead, a city traumatized. Details had been scarce, heavily redacted. Even he hadn't seen the full file, though Daisy had once quietly murmured something cryptic, eyes haunted with sorrow. Makima saw the shadow cross his face, but she pressed on gently, her voice carrying a gentle promise. No more forced experiments, Hiroshi. No more disposable Pokémon. From now on, they will choose their trainers willingly. Pokémon partners will have rights, freedoms. And every single Pokémon we rescue from situations like that Shanghai laboratory will be given a chance either to rehabilitate and live free, or willingly partner with someone they trust. Hiroshi felt a profound weight, one he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying, lift from his shoulders at those words. For years, this very nightmare haunted him that no matter how many operations he completed, how many Pokémon and children he saved, the fundamental system itself would remain broken, perpetuating endless suffering. Yet if Makima had truly accomplished this, perhaps things could finally change. They both watched him quietly, Makima's eyes patient yet hopeful, Yoshimura's filled with quiet, proud encouragement. For a moment, Hiroshi's gaze drifted down to the photograph from the folder, a desolate, empty lab, cages open and abandoned. In his mind's eye, faces from his past flickered silently, his lost siblings, the friends he'd failed, his mom, ghosts whose details he kept deliberately obscured, too painful to acknowledge fully. They all seemed to quietly urge him forward, reminding him of his purpose, of the dreams he'd buried beneath grief and guilt, dreams they all shared. Images of Daisy's gentle face, Reisha's confident grin, and Machop's tentative, hopeful eyes floated through his thoughts. His Pokémon, his true family, had always believed in him, stood by him without hesitation, even in his darkest moments. How could he turn away now, when the world itself seemed poised on the edge of genuine change? Slowly, Hiroshi drew a long, steadying breath. Then, with quiet but undeniable resolve, he nodded. "All right," he murmured finally, voice firm and steady. "I'll do it. I'll return to Tokyo and help you put things right." Makima closed her eyes briefly in palpable relief, letting out a quiet breath she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. Beside him, Yoshimura visibly relaxed, smiling broadly and proudly, his aged eyes shining with emotion. But Hiroshi's voice hardened slightly, his next words carrying steel and a sense of quiet command. "But listen carefully, this return is temporary." He locked eyes with Makima, his expression solemn. "I'll come on board as assistant director of the Kanto branch. I'll stabilize it, retrieve those stolen Pokémon, build a new elite Pokémon laboratory with proper safeguards and compassionate practices, and help you purge corruption from the other PSIA branches. But once that's done, once the situation is truly stable, I'm gone again. Back into exile, into the shadows, whatever you want to call it." He glanced away, absently toying with a frayed thread on his sleeve, adding quietly, almost to himself, "I'm not planting roots again, not back in that city." Makima studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She likely hoped he would change his mind in time, but she was wise enough not to press the issue now. Instead, she inclined her head. "Understood. I'm grateful for whatever you're willing to give." A faint smile touched her lips. "Though I'll note, it's not really exile if the Prime Minister himself welcomes you home." Hiroshi huffed a soft, almost laugh. "I suppose not." Yoshimura clapped him on the back gently. "We'll take it one step at a time. Just having you back will mean the world to the good people still left at HQ. Morale's been, well, it's been rough. They need hope. They need their hero Fox, even if only for a while." Hiroshi flushed slightly at the word hero, but he let it pass. Instead, he asked, "When do we leave?" Makima's expression turned businesslike again, though there was a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. "Our flight's in a few hours. We came on a private jet courtesy of the PM's office to avoid unwanted attention. We can be back in Tokyo by tonight." Hiroshi gave a slow nod, eyes briefly drifting to a distant point beyond Makima's shoulder. "Tokyo." He swallowed, feeling a sharp pang as old memories stirred. The thought of returning there wasn't something he took lightly. "I'll need to pack things here first," Hiroshi said after a pause, voice quiet but resolute. He looked Makima directly in the eyes, a seriousness in his gaze. I'll also need your help arranging accommodations for myself and the team. A place large enough to hold everyone comfortably. Reishu alone takes up half a bed, and Dragonair likes open spaces. And, he hesitated, a faint smile forming, a big bathtub. Melodic would never forgive me if she's forced into a bucket again. Makima gave a soft laugh, nodding easily. We'll set you up somewhere comfortable and secure. A suite near headquarters should suffice. Whatever you need. Thank you, Hiroshi murmured, eyes flickering away once more. He felt strangely touched by her ready willingness to accommodate him. It was different, a subtle respect born perhaps of her new position, or perhaps something more personal. He appreciated that she wasn't pushing him beyond what he'd willingly offered. It spoke volumes about their relationship after everything they'd been through together. A silence briefly settled in the room. Hiroshi shifted uneasily, recalling that old, small mansion he once called home in Tokyo. It felt so distant, yet the memories were sharp as ever. Shrouded figures half seen through smoke-filled rooms, a feminine silhouette laughing in the kitchen doorway, the scent of cigarette smoke mingled with antiseptic from late-night shifts at the hospital. Playful but rough hands ruffling his hair, playful scolding as she stole bites of his cooking, even though it was often inedible. He remembered skipping classes, topping exams anyway, the way his Yakuza friends would scramble and scatter laughing into the dark alleys whenever their latest hustle went sideways, and memories of her. It struck Hiroshi that Makima was treating him with a deference that was new. Perhaps it was because she was Director General now and saw him as an indispensable asset, or perhaps it was simply gratitude and respect between friends. Either way, he appreciated that she wasn't pushing him beyond what he'd offered. They spent a few more minutes ironing out immediate details. Makima would handle the travel documents and a cover story for why Hiroshi Kobayashi was suddenly back in the country, given his official records likely still listed him as on an extended overseas assignment. Yoshimura mentioned he'd prepare a quiet announcement to the remaining staff at the Kanto branch to pave the way for Hiroshi's return. It was almost ironic, Hiroshi thought. He had slipped in and out of foreign countries like a ghost, yet returning openly to his own homeland required careful choreography. As they wrapped up, Makima reached out and squeezed Hiroshi's shoulder, her voice soft. Thank you. Truly. In that moment, she wasn't the steely Director General or the calculating spy master. She was just a friend, relieved and grateful that he was coming back. Hiroshi gave a small smile. You brought me into the PSIA, Hiroshi replied quietly, meeting her gaze evenly. You believed in me when no one else did. When I was at my lowest, you gave me purpose. You helped me find my footing again, and together we brought down Ringmaster once and for all. If not for you, I'd probably still be lost somewhere out there. His voice dropped slightly. This is me returning the favor. A hint of emotion touched Makima's face, perhaps even the glisten of a tear she would never allow to fall. She squeezed his shoulder once more and then stood, straightening her jacket. I'll hold you to that favor, she replied lightly, masking her sentiment with a playful tone. Yoshimura pushed himself up from the couch with a soft grunt and adjusted his coat. As they headed for the door, he rested a hand on Hiroshi's back. Proud of you, son, he said in a low voice meant just for Hiroshi. They always come back to the fold, et. Hiroshi managed a genuine grin at that, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. I guess they do. Downstairs, curious eyes were tilted upward. Daisy had kept a respectful telepathic block around the upstairs room to give them privacy, but she and the others could tell the serious tone of the conversation above had ended. When Hiroshi appeared at the top of the stairs with Makima and Yoshimura in tow, all the Pokémon looked up expectantly. Hiroshi descended slowly, unsure how to break the news. Most of his Pokémon had never been to Tokyo before. He was in self-imposed exile for 3 years, but it had felt like 30. He met most of them during the exile itself and trained them and cured their trauma and made them strong. Reishu's ears perked at his approach, and the electric type bounded off the couch to meet him. Daisy stood poised nearby, her hands clasped in front of her, crimson eyes searching his face. Machop hopped up from his blanket, sensing a shift, and looked between Hiroji and the others, perplexed. Hiroji took a breath and managed a smile. A new mission was beginning, but he wouldn't be facing it alone. He never truly had. He stepped forward into the living room, with Makima and Yashimura hanging back by the staircase. All his Pokémon gathered around in a loose semicircle, anticipation writ large on every face. "Well," Hiroji began, scratching the back of his neck in a habit of mild embarrassment. "Looks like we're going back to Tokyo." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Wartortle paused mid-crunch on a berry. Ivysaur tilted his head as if wondering if he heard correctly. Charmeleon's tail flame flared an inch brighter, and he exchanged a glance with Ivysaur that was half surprise, half excitement. Dragonair lifted her sapphire head and let out a curious trill. Swablu fluttered down from Laren's back to land atop Hiroji's shoulder, as if needing to be closer to confirm what it heard. Then the reactions came, all at once. Kurla Akimi bounced on her toes and clapped her small hands, letting out a delighted Kurla-aa. Whether from the idea of a new adventure or the thought of seeing the city lights she'd only watched in dramas, who could say? Laren gave a snort and a decisive nod. Wherever Hiroji went, he would follow without question. Melodic arched her neck gracefully above the rim of her tub and smiled, a ripple of her tail sending a small wave sloshing, perhaps her way of cheering. And near the front, Daisy's lips curved into a knowing, gentle smile, while Reisha pumped one paw in the air with an enthusiastic rai-rai. The Gardevoir and the Reisha exchanged a glance between them, Daisy's eyes warm with understanding, Reisha's bright with excitement. They had been with Hiroji the longest, through every triumph and tragedy, and it seemed they, more than anyone, had expected this moment. They knew Hiroji's heart better than he did himself sometimes, and there was a kind of proud affirmation in their expressions, as if to say, "We knew you wouldn't abandon home forever, you wouldn't abandon her." Dropping to one knee, he opened his arms and was immediately swarmed by his Pokémon. Wartortle hopped into his lap with a jubilant cry, Charmeleon playfully nudged his shoulder, and even the reserved Alakazam floated nearer, patting Hiroji's arm with a long mustached grin. Machop, still a bit awestruck, stepped forward hesitantly. He caught Daisy's encouraging nod and Reisha's welcoming wave, and with that, the little Machop joined the group hug, nestling in beside Ivysaur and receiving a gentle pat on the head from Hiroji. "Tokyo, hey!" Hiroji said into the bundle of fur, scales, and smiles surrounding him. "Big city, bright lights. You all ready for that?" His tone was teasing. Reisha puffed out his chest and chittered confidently he had been born ready for anything. Dragonair coiled affectionately around Hiroji's shoulders and gave a soft purring sound, as if to say she'd go anywhere as long as they were together. Kurla was already spinning around imagining the skyscrapers. Machop looked up at Hiroji with fierce determination in his red eyes and pumped his small fist. He was ready to fight whoever had to be fought, especially after learning what Hiroji had agreed to. Seeing that, Hiroji gently placed a hand on Machop's shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll all be fighting the good fight," he said quietly, understanding Machop's unspoken vow. Behind them, Makima watched the touching scene with a rare tenderness in her gaze, while Yashimura actually pulled out a handkerchief to dab at his eyes, not even bothering to hide his smile. It wasn't often one saw an elite agent in an embrace with half a dozen Pokémon, laughing and nearly in tears all at once, but then, Hiroji had never been an ordinary agent. After a few joyful moments, Hiroji stood, surrounded by his Pokémon as they parted to give him space. There was work to do now, preparations to be made for their journey home. He took charge with his usual gentle authority. "All right, everyone," he said, clapping his hands once. "Finish up breakfast and start tidying things. We have a flight to catch this afternoon." Immediately, the living room burst into cheerful activity. Reisha dashed off and returned with a half-eaten puffin he had stashed, determined not to waste it before they left. Wartortle, still brimming with energy, gathered the towels and supplies from Melodic's spa tub, nearly slipping on the damp floor in his enthusiasm. Melodic chuckled and allowed Daisy to help her out of the tub, the gardevoir effortlessly levitating the container of water to the bathroom to drain. Charmeleon and Ivysaur, competitive to the last, made a game of cleaning up their little mess by the window, Charmeleon using the heat of his tail flame to dry a spill of water while Ivysaur wiped the spot with a large leaf, both of them pretending not to race while clearly racing. Swablu fluttered about picking up crumbs and dusting surfaces with its fluffy wings, singing a bright tune as it did. Laren lumbered over to nudge their travel trunks out from a corner, and Kurla Akimi used her psychic power to neatly line up everyone's pokeballs and personal items for packing. Machop stood in the center of the bustle, turning in small odd circles as he watched everyone prepare. A day ago, he'd never have imagined such a sight, Pokémon choosing to pack their belongings, eager to follow a human not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He felt a reassuring tap on his shoulder. It was Reishu, offering him a clean cloth to help wipe down the table. Machop's face lit up. Though his bandaged leg still made him hobble a little, he set to work with earnest zeal, side by side with Reishu and under Alakazam's approving eye. Hiroshi moved through them all, supervising but also lending a hand wherever needed. He carefully sealed their mission data and a few personal effects into a secure briefcase. Methodically, he double-checked Machop's newly obtained Pokeball. Though rarely used, it needed proper registration for travel. With a gentle yet firm reminder, he cautioned Kurla, who was enthusiastically stuffing snacks into a single bag, not to overpack and risk bursting it mid-journey. Kurla paused, her cheeks turning a soft shade of pink as she offered Hiroshi a sheepish giggle. Within an hour, the safe house had been restored to its original, sterile anonymity, stripped of the warmth and vibrant chaos they had filled it with. What was briefly their sanctuary was now just another empty house, devoid of signs that anyone had ever found joy within its walls. Hiroshi paused in the doorway, taking one final, lingering glance around the room, allowing the memories of laughter and companionship to settle deeply into his heart. Then, with practiced ease, his hand drifted to the pokeballs at his belt. "All right, everyone," Hiroshi murmured softly, voice tinged with a gentle authority, "it's time." One by one, beams of red light silently enveloped the Pokémon around him, their forms dissolving back into their respective Pokeballs with subtle pulses of warmth. The quiet hum of the capsule ceiling left a hollow echo in the now deserted room. Only Daisy and Reishu lingered a moment longer, their eyes conveying unspoken trust and reassurance before they too vanished into the warm glow. Hiroshi secured each ball carefully on his belt, a quiet determination settling over him. Makima and Yoshimura watched silently, respecting the quiet solemnity of the moment. They had seen Hiroshi's bond with his Pokémon countless times before, yet each farewell carried a subtle weight, a private ritual between soldier and trusted companions. Finally, Hiroshi turned toward Makima, his posture straightening instinctively into that familiar readiness that defined him. "So, Director," Hiroshi began quietly, eyes reflecting the subtle glint of anticipation beneath his calm expression, "what comes next?" Makima smiled faintly, her lips curling into that enigmatic smirk he knew well, part promise, part warning. She took a deliberate step closer, meeting his gaze with an intensity that suggested she already had every detail planned to perfection. "Now, Hiroshi," Makima said softly, her voice holding just a whisper of intrigue, "it's time for the homecoming." Chapter 15, Operation Homecoming. Aki Hayakawa PSIA Field Agent, Eastern Europe. A frigid wind whipped through the abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of a forgotten Eastern European town. Midnight. Shadows pooled under broken concrete arches as Aki Hayakawa pressed his back against a crumbling wall, his breath fogging in the cold air. The distant glow of red emergency lights bathed the alley in a moody crimson haze. Overhead, storm clouds gathered, rumbling like distant artillery. In the uneasy silence between thunderclaps, Aki could hear the muffled whine of caged Pokémon and the shuffle of armed guards patrolling the perimeter ahead. Clutching his silenced pistol, Aki peered around the corner. Two sentries stood by a chain-link gate, rifles slung at their shoulders. Beyond them, the lab's loading bay door was partly open, a wedge of pale fluorescent light cutting into the dark. Inside, shadows moved, scientists and mercenaries orchestrating one last illicit experiment. Illegal Pokeball prototypes and biotech equipment littered the loading dock. This was one of the last Ringmaster facilities, a black lab where stolen Japanese research found its way into ruthless hands. Aki's jaw tightened. He remembered Makama's terse briefing months ago: track every lead on our stolen Pokémon research. No matter where in the world. It had led him here, to this crumbling Soviet-era factory repurposed for monstrosities. In the distance, a Pikachu's anguished squeal pierced the night, the sound of a creature in pain. Aki's grip on his pistol firmed. He wouldn't let another lab slip away. He exhaled, calm and slow, signaling two local Interpol operatives flanking him. They nodded on his mark. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating Aki's face, a young man with dark hair tied in a neat top knot, eyes sharp with focus. A cigarette ember glowed at his feet where he'd dropped it moments before, breach a habit picked up from a dear comrade he hoped to see again soon. At his hip, a sleek katana-like sword hung sheathed, a silent promise that if guns failed, steel and resolve would not. With a swift hand gesture, Aki moved. In 3 ghost-like strides he closed in on the gate. The guards noticed a flicker of motion, too late. Thwip, thwip. 2 silenced shots, 2 men down, crumpling before they could cry out. Aki and the Interpol agents slipped inside the compound, feet crunching on frost-laced gravel. Inside the loading bay, the scene erupted in chaos under strobing alarm lights. Aki had hoped for a quiet infiltration, but a panicked researcher hit the alarm the moment he spotted the intruders. So much for subtlety. Aki darted behind a steel pillar as gunfire raked across the bay. The Interpol agents returned cover fire, pinning down mercenaries behind upturned crates. In the melee, frightened lab-coated technicians fled, some releasing pokeballs in desperation. Aki's eyes widened as a hulking Machoke materialized amidst the crates with a guttural roar. "Deal with it," he shouted to one of the Interpol men over the din. The agent unleashed a German shepherd-like houndoom from his side. The dark canine snarled and lunged at the Machoke, engaging it in a fierce tussle between flame and muscle. Aki did not pause to watch, he trusted his teammates. Moving fluidly, he vaulted onto a catwalk ladder, taking the high ground. From above, he could see rows of makeshift cages inside. Frightened eyes glinted, rare Pokémon the Ringmaster goons had rounded up for experimentation. A wave of anger and protectiveness surged in him. He remembered the reports of what happened in Kanto, of how traitors stole every Pokémon from Japan's central lab, betraying all of them. That wound was still raw. Not again. Never again. A mercenary spotted Aki on the catwalk and aimed an assault rifle upward. Bullets tore through rusted metal, sparking. Aki rolled forward, drawing his sword in one fluid motion. In a flash of steel and a leap, he closed the distance. The mercenary's radio crackled with frantic chatter but was abruptly cut off as Aki struck, the pommel of his blade knocking the man out cold with surgical precision. No unnecessary kills, that was something Hiroshi had taught him in training years ago. Aki bound the man's wrists with a zip tie, adrenaline thrumming in his veins. Below, the houndoom's flamethrower lit up the bay in flickering orange as it subdued the Machoke. The remaining guards were disoriented, some attempting a futile retreat. Aki noticed one man in a lab coat trying to abscond with a briefcase full of stolen data drives. In a heartbeat, Aki had his pistol trained on the man. "Freeze!" he barked, voice echoing through the cavernous bay. The man dropped the case with a clatter and raised shaking hands. Within minutes, it was over. The lab was secured, mercenaries disarmed and corralled, and the surviving researchers on their knees with hands over their heads. The cages holding whimpering Pokémon were already being pried open by Aki's Interpol partners, freeing the terrified creatures. A gaunt Charmeleon with scarred scales stumbled out of its pen, and Aki gently caught it before it fell. "You're okay now," he whispered, steadying the trembling Pokémon. In that moment, Aki's hardened expression softened. He felt the weight of every life saved and every life stolen by the traitors he couldn't yet stop. Before he could dwell on it, a secure satellite phone vibrated against his chest. Aki holstered his pistol and stepped aside, flipping open the encrypted device. Only a handful of people had this number. His heart kicked against his ribs as he saw the caller ID, Makima, PSIA HQ. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Hayakawa," he answered, voice still steadied by combat focus. Makima's voice came through, calm but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "Aki, report." "Eastern European lab secure," he replied briskly, surveying the unconscious foes sprawled across the bay. "Data and assets in hand. I can start the intel extraction." "Negative," Makima interjected, her tone brooking no protest. "New orders. All agents are to disengage and return to Tokyo immediately." Aki felt a jolt run through him. "All agents?" He unconsciously gripped the phone tighter. In all his years with PSIA, he'd never heard of a complete recall. This is everyone?" he asked, voice hushed with surprise. "Everyone," Makima confirmed gravely. "It's an all-hands recall. As of now, Operation Homecoming is in effect." For a moment, Aki was silent. Below him, the freed Charmeleon nuzzled weakly against his leg, as if sensing the agent's sudden unease. Aki's mind raced. If Makima was pulling every field agent back to headquarters, the situation in Tokyo must be critical. He thought of the catastrophic betrayal that had rocked their agency and of the legendary man who had just returned to them. Hiroshi. The elusive fox had come home at last, and now Makima was rallying all her trusted operatives. The pieces clicked into place. This was the beginning of something big. Aki took a steadying breath, exchanging a knowing look with the Interpol agents who had paused, curious at his side. "Understood," he said firmly into the phone. Duty and a flicker of anticipation coiled together in his chest. "I'll wrap up here and be on the next transport out." Makima's voice softened just a touch. "Thank you, Aki. Tokyo awaits you. Hiroshi awaits you." The line cut out. Aki lowered the phone slowly, Makima's final words echoing in his ears. He glanced around at the scene, the shattered remnants of the lab, the whimpering Pokémon now safe, the mercenaries bound. Normally, he would stay to extract every ounce of intel from this operation, tie up every loose end meticulously. But if Hiroshi's return had triggered an all-hands recall, Aki knew the front line was shifting back home. He knelt one last time, helping the injured Charmeleon over to an Interpol medic. Gently, he placed a reassuring hand on the Pokémon's head, then stood and tightened his coat against the biting cold. "Pack it up," he ordered the team quietly, voice resolved. "We leave now." As Aki stepped out into the night, the thunder above finally broke into a cascade of cold rain. He tilted his face up for a second, feeling the drops on his skin and the weight of what was to come. In the distance, the sirens of local authorities grew louder. The baton would be passed to them to mop up here. His part in this corner of the world was done. Now, Tokyo called, and Aki Hayakawa would answer without hesitation. In his chest, amidst the adrenaline and exhaustion, he felt a glimmer of hope and fierce loyalty. For Makima. For Hiroshi. For all that had been lost and all that might yet be saved. He vanished into the darkness toward the rendezvous point, the crimson glow of the forsaken lab fading behind him, ready to return home. Chapter 16, Kobani Higashiyama. Kobani Higashiyama, PSIA Field Agent, Southeast Asia. A lone jeep sat idling at the edge of a dense jungle, its headlights cut to slits. Midnight in Southeast Asia brought a suffocating heat, even under the pale moon. Kobani Higashiyama wiped a sheen of sweat from her brow as she steadied her trembling hands on the steering wheel. In the back seat, crates rattled, contents clinking ominously. To any bandit on these old smuggler roads, she looked like just another black market courier running contraband across the Mekong. In truth, every nerve in Kobani's body was on edge. Please let this go smoothly, she prayed silently, stomach in knots. Up ahead, through the dusty glow of the jeep's parking lights, figures emerged from the tree line. 3 men in tatty military fatigues, rifles slung, flanked a fourth in a white linen suit far too clean for the jungle. That must be the buyer. Kobani inhaled sharply, forcing a smile as she stepped out of the vehicle. The humid air wrapped around her like a damp blanket, and a chorus of insects hummed in the darkness. Evening, the man in the suit drawled, adjusting gold-rimmed glasses on his nose. His accent was European, and his gaze flicked to the PSIA patch barely visible on Kobani's sleeve. "You're far from Tokyo, little lady. I was expecting our usual courier." Kobani's heart skipped. She had spent hours rehearsing her cover, and now words nearly failed her. He couldn't make it," she managed, willing her voice not to quake. She forced a casual shrug. "Tokyo's cracking down, I was sent instead. The goods are here, as promised." She patted the nearest crate in the jeep's back, hoping he wouldn't hear the quiver in her gesture. One of the armed guards circled to the back of the jeep and pried open a crate. Inside were rows of Pokeball prototypes nestled in straw. Kobani felt a pang of guilt seeing them. These devices were stolen tech, meant to trap and traffic rare Pokémon. The guard pulled one out, tossing it in his hand with a skeptical grunt. "Looks legit," he reported in Thai to the buyer. The man in the suit smiled thinly. "Excellent. Our friends in Ringmaster will be very pleased." He beckoned another guard forward with a metal case payment. "And you'll get your cut for playing delivery girl." Kobani swallowed. This was the moment. The plan was simple: confirm the handoff, then covertly signal the strike team lying in wait. She could already feel the tiny transmitter in her pocket digging into her palm. One press and a dozen local police and Interpol agents would storm in. But there was a hitch. One of the guards had stepped closer, squinting at her face in the dim light. Kobani tensed. "I know you," the guard asked in halting English. He was gaunt, scarred, and uncomfortably tall. "Saw you in Chiang Mai, maybe. You were with Japanese group, police." His rifle wasn't raised, but Kobani saw his finger slip toward the trigger guard. A spike of panic shot through her. "Police? Me?" Kobani let out a high, nervous laugh that was all too genuine. I think you have me confused. I get that a lot, I have one of those faces." She coughed, taking a half step back toward the jeep. The buyer's eyes darkened. "Is that so?" he murmured. In a flash, he snatched the transmitter from her hand. Kobani hadn't even realized her fingers were hovering over her pocket, ready to press it. He looked at the tiny device and sighed. Tisk. Such a shame. For a split second, nobody moved. Kobani's blood ran cold. "Oh no! No no no! Ambush!" the buyer barked, flinging the transmitter into the bushes. The nearest guard lunged at Kobani, rifle swinging. Instinct took over. Kobani ducked low with a yelp, the rifle butt whooshing over her head. She scrambled back, adrenaline igniting something primal in her muscles. The guard tried to grab her arm, but Kobani was faster. In her terror-fueled agility, she vaulted onto the hood of the jeep. Gunfire erupted, wild muzzle flashes strobing the jungle gloom. The strike team, alerted by the buyer's shout, must have initiated their move even without her signal. Bullets zipped past as the smugglers and unseen allies exchanged fire among the trees. Kobani pressed herself flat against the hood of the jeep, heart hammering. A guard climbed onto the bumper, reaching for her ankle. Whimpering, Kobani kicked out reflexively, her boot connecting with his jaw. The man fell back with a grunt, stunned more by surprise than force. I surrender." Kobani cried out impulsively, hands in the air, half hoping the smugglers would just take the goods and run. It was a reflex born of sheer panic. But surrender wasn't an option. These men would not let a witness live. The buyer glared at her, drawing a sleek pistol. A crack echoed, one well-placed sniper shot from the dark sent the buyer's pistol skittering away in pieces. Kobani's backup had arrived. In moments, armed police swarmed the clearing, shouting orders in a cacophony of Thai and English. The firefight ended as quickly as it began. 2 smugglers were down and the rest dropping their weapons, faces pressed to the dirt. Kobani slid off the jeep's hood, knees so weak she nearly collapsed. An Interpol officer rushed to her side, but she managed a shaky nod, signaling she was unhurt at least physically. "Good timing," she mumbled, voice wobbly with relief. The officer gave her a thumbs up and moved on to cuff the incapacitated men. Amid the flurry of arrests, Kobani leaned against the jeep to catch her breath. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She closed her eyes, willing the dizziness away. "I hate this job. I hate this," she thought, tears of adrenaline and stress prickling at the corners of her eyes. All she had wanted was a quiet life, but here she was dodging bullets in a foreign jungle. The danger was over for now, yet she couldn't calm the storm inside. Her pocket suddenly vibrated. Kobani jumped, nearly yelping as she fumbled for the phone she'd stashed. It was her PSIA-issued secure phone, miraculously still intact in the chaos. She flipped it open with clammy fingers. A single encrypted text message glowed on the screen. Priority 1 Directive, Operation Homecoming Full Recall. All agents return to Tokyo immediately. Acknowledge receipt. Kobani blinked, reading it twice to be sure. Full recall? She had never seen those words in her career. Around her, the clearing was alive with police radios and the groans of detained criminals, but Kobani felt time slow as the significance sank in. Every agent back to Tokyo. It almost didn't compute. Pulling all operatives from the field was a move of last resort, something reserved for only the gravest of crises. She recalled Makima's stern face the day the news of the great betrayal broke. That morning, every loyal agent had swore to follow Makima to hell and back to restore PSIA's honor. Kobani had been terrified then, too, yet Makima's resolve, and Hiroshi's storied heroism, spoken of in whispers, had given her courage. Now, if they were being called home, it could only mean one thing: the final fight was at their doorstep. Kobani's breath hitched. A mix of relief and new fear flooded through her. Relief, because going home meant safety, no more gunfights in distant jungles, at least for a while. She'd get to see familiar faces, her teammates, maybe even laugh awkwardly at one of Denji's stupid jokes or feel Himeno's comforting arm around her shoulders. But fear, too, because if Tokyo itself was the battleground, then nowhere was truly safe. Her thumb hovered over the reply button. She imagined Makima back at HQ, and perhaps Hiroshi Kobayashi, the legendary fox she'd admired but never met, standing together, rallying their scattered flock. Kobani straightened up, wiping her eyes with the back of a dirty hand. She was exhausted, petrified even, but she wasn't about to let them down. Not after everything. With a deep, steadying breath, Kobani typed her acknowledgement. Higashiyama received. Returning ASAP. She hit send. The weight of the jungle night pressed around her, but inside, a fragile steadiness took root. This nightmare mission was finally over. Now a new, uncertain chapter loomed. As she pocketed the phone, Kobani allowed herself a small, shaky smile. I guess we're going home," she whispered, almost not believing it. In the distance, the first hint of dawn was lightening the sky, a faint glow touching the swirls of mist above the trees. It felt symbolic somehow, an end to one long, dark night. One of the Thai officers approached, gesturing that they'd give her a ride to the airfield. Kobani nodded gratefully. Her legs still felt like jelly as she climbed into the back of a police truck, cradling her frayed nerves. As the convoy started rolling down the dirt path, she cast one last look at the chaotic clearing fading into the jungle behind them. Going home. To Tokyo, to Makima, to whatever awaited. Kobani allowed herself a quiet, hopeful thought amid the anxiety. maybe, just maybe, things would be better when they were all together again. She closed her eyes and let her head rest back against the seat as the first orange rays of sunrise peeked over the horizon, guiding her back to those she trusted. Chapter 17, Kishive. Kishive PSIA Field Agent, Middle East. A dusty tavern on the outskirts of a Middle Eastern border town thrummed with low voices and the smell of strong liquor. Kishive sat at a corner table under a bare flickering bulb, rolling a half-empty glass of whiskey in his scarred hand. The lamplight drew harsh lines across his weathered face and the constellation of old scars along his jaw. Around him, a motley assortment of mercenaries and smugglers laughed raucously over a dice game, oblivious to the Japanese man in their midst. Kishive preferred it that way, invisible until he chose to be noticed. Across from him slouched an informant, a wiry man with darting eyes who had spent the last hour spilling secrets. A cigarette dangled from Kishive's lips as he listened to the man's hushed report. Heard through the grapevine, the informant murmured in Arabic, that some big fish from Japan are paying top dollar for discreet shipments. Weapons, vehicles, even biological storage units. They're stockpiling somewhere in the desert. He tapped nervously on the table. Word is, they've got friends in high places protecting the convoys. Kishive's dark eyes narrowed slightly. So the traders were arming up and covering their tracks out here. He took a slow drag of his cigarette, exhaling a curl of smoke. Names, he said simply, voice gravelly but quiet. The informant gulped from his own glass. No names. Just a code name, Jackal. He's brokering the deals. If I sniff out more. Kishive slid a few folded bills across the table. You will, he said, cutting the man off. And when you do, you know how to reach me. The informant pocketed the cash with a quick nod and made himself scarce. Left alone, Kishive threw back the rest of his whiskey in one smooth motion. It burned nicely down his throat. Outside, a burst of distant gunfire rattled the night, just another reminder of how precarious the region was. Kishive glanced toward the door, contemplating his next move. He'd been tracing shadowy supply lines for weeks, hoping to uncover where the ex-PSIA traders might surface. The stolen Pokémon tech, the research, it all tied into bigger power plays here. Yet, he felt on the cusp of something. He reached into his coat for a battered flask to top up his glass when a petite barmaid approached with a flirtatious smile. Before she could offer another drink, Kishive's satellite phone buzzed against the table, its vibration rattling the empty glass. He held up a finger to the barmaid, who pouted but moved on. Kishive flipped open the phone, the screen's glow revealing a secure message header. Even before reading it, he had a hunch, a sudden tingling sense that this was it. He scanned the message, eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. Priority 1, full recall, all agents report back to Tokyo HQ immediately. Acknowledge and proceed exfil. For a long moment, Kishive just stared at the words. The din of the tavern receded as a focused calm settled over him. So Makima had finally pulled the trigger on a full recall. He hadn't seen one in all his years, not even when things were dire. His lone eye, the other hidden under an old eye patch from a far-gone injury, flicked to the date and timestamp. It was real, and it was now. Kishive huffed a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. A couple of younger mercenaries at the dice game glanced his way, noticing his amused smirk. Ignoring their looks, Kishive tapped out a confirmation on the phone, acknowledged Kishive. En route. He took one last slow look around the seedy bar. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, barely cutting the stale heat. In the corner, the dice players erupted into cheers at a lucky roll. It struck Kishive how normal it all felt, despite the earth-shaking implication of the recall order. The world goes on, he mused, even as theirs was about to change. He stood, tossing a few local coins on the table for the whiskey. As he slid on his worn leather jacket, the barmaid sidled over, disappointment in her eyes. Leaving so soon, she purred. Kishive gave her a polite, tired half-smile. Duty calls, he replied in clumsy Arabic, voice low and apologetic. She seemed to understand, her gaze lingering on the long scar across his cheek as he turned to go. Stepping out into the warm midnight air, Kishive tilted his head up. The night sky here was vast and unapologetically clear, a spray of stars over the dark outline of distant dunes. He took a moment to savor the quiet, lighting another cigarette with a practiced flick of his lighter. The tip glowed orange as he inhaled, thinking of Tokyo. He imagined Makima at HQ, making the same call to all their scattered operatives, and Hiroshi Kobayashi, the kid prodigy he'd only met once, years ago, finally back in the fold. If those two were joining forces now, then the storm was truly at hand. Kishive cracked his neck and exhaled smoke. A faint grin tugged at his lips. He recalled training two particular rookies not long ago, a loud-mouthed red-haired girl and a scrappy blonde punk, Denji and Power. What a handful they'd been, raising hell and calling it training. Kishive chuckled under his breath at the memory of their antics in Tokyo's abandoned warehouses. They were rough around the edges, but they had guts. His brats. No doubt they'd be in the thick of whatever was coming. He wondered if they'd managed to stay alive this long without him babysitting. With a final glance at the far horizon, Kishive turned on his heel and walked toward the shadows where his motorbike was hidden. The informant's intel would have to wait. If Makima wanted everyone home, the intel web was being cast aside in favor of a more direct battle. And honestly, that suited him just fine. Kishive had always been a man of action when push came to shove. He swung onto his motorcycle, the engine growling to life. Pulling his bandana up over his mouth to guard against the dust, he revved the throttle. All right then, back to the wolf's den, he muttered to himself. A moment later, Kishive sped off into the night, a trail of sand kicked up in his wake. The phone's recall message burned in his mind. This was the endgame calling. And while he'd never admit it aloud, a spark of anticipation ignited in his blood. Tokyo and the final showdown awaited, and Kishive would be there with a sharpened blade, a loaded gun, and perhaps a much-needed drink in hand. Chapter 18, Himeno. Himeno PSIA Field Agent, Western Europe. A light rain fell over the cobblestone streets of a Western European capital, turning the glow of old street lamps into halos in the mist. Himeno tugged the brim of her black beret lower to keep the drizzle out of her one good eye as she slipped through the late-night crowd. She moved with unhurried elegance, just another fashionable woman leaving a soiree, or so it appeared. Under her stylish charcoal coat, a compact pistol rested against her hip, and in her clutch she carried a dossier of freshly stolen intel. The gentle tap of her heels on wet stone belied the whirlwind in her mind. From across the narrow street, her target emerged from a grand stone building, oblivious to the ghost trailing him. A former PSIA researcher turned traitor, Dr. Schneider laughed boisterously with two associates under an umbrella as they said their goodnights. Himeno's lips curved into a wry smile around the unlit cigarette she held there. She'd charmed her way into that gala tonight just to brush shoulders with the good doctor and lift files from his briefcase while he was busy admiring her assets. Men are so easily distracted, she thought with a silent chuckle. Now she had proof of his connection to the Pokémon lab heist, names of buyers, a list of augmented Pokémon specimens trafficked through Europe, all tucked safely in her purse. The plan was to shadow him to his car, then disappear into the wet night. Mission accomplished. Himeno's breath puffed white in the chilly air as she hung back, watching Schneider under the yellow lamps. For a moment her mind wandered. She pictured Aki stoic, serious Aki scolding her if he knew she'd gone alone into this den of vipers. A soft snort escaped her. I can handle myself, Aki. After all, she had taught him a thing or two back in the day. She pressed a finger to the leather patch over her right eye, a habitual gesture. The lost eye no longer hurt, not physically, but it was a reminder of what she'd sacrificed to keep her juniors alive. Aki, Kobani, Denji, she'd bleed for any of them again without regret. Dr. Schneider's chauffeur pulled up, a sleek black sedan cutting through puddles. Time to move. Himeno flicked the wheel of her lighter, finally igniting that cigarette between her lips. She took a long drag, a reward for a job well done, and stepped forward to tail the doctor from a safe distance. Before she could close the gap, a discreet vibration tickled her wrist. Her smartwatch, synced to PSIA's secure network, pulsed with a high-priority alert. Himeno halted in a shadowed doorway, raising her arm to glance at the small screen. Through a veil of rain, the message blazed. Urgent recall order, all operatives return to Tokyo at once. Himeno's heart skipped. What? She whispered to herself. The cigarette nearly slipped from her lips. An all operatives recall? She'd never seen one, never even heard rumors of such an order being issued in her years of service. 1,000 questions flooded her mind, but training quickly overrode shock. HQ wouldn't issue this lightly. If they did, it meant Tokyo was ground zero for something catastrophic or vital. Across the street, Schneider's car door slammed. He was leaving. Himeno allowed herself one small curse under her breath. Every instinct screamed at her to follow that man, to finish the mission she had worked so hard to set up. But Makima's directive was unambiguous. And Himeno trusted Makima with her life. She took one last drag of her cigarette and flicked it into a gutter, embers hissing out in the rain. With a sharp exhale, she stepped back from the street's edge, letting Schneider's sedan drive off into the foggy night untailed. It stung to let him go, but if things were as dire as she suspected, there wouldn't be a safe corner on Earth for traitors like him soon enough. Himeno tapped a quick response into her watch. Himeno acknowledged. Heading home. The screen confirmed transmission, and she felt a twist of both worry and anticipation in her gut. If every agent was being called in, it meant they'd all be together again. Aki, Kobani, the whole ragtag family. And Hiroshi. The thought of the legendary elusive fox back in Tokyo made her stand a little straighter. She'd never met the young man, but she knew what he meant to Makima, and to Japan. His return had to be the reason behind this drastic move. Something big was coming, and Makima wanted her best at her side. A heavy drop of rain rolled off Himeno's beret as she cast a final glance at the empty street where her target had been moments before. Another mission left incomplete, yet she felt strangely at peace with it. The world was shifting under their feet, priorities were changing. She thought of a night long ago at a ramen shop in Tokyo, laughing with Aki and the others after a rough operation. They'd made a pact, drunk on camaraderie, and maybe a little sake, that when the time came, they'd face the worst of it together, no matter what. Himeno smiled softly at the memory, eyes bright even in the dreary rain. She turned on her heel and began walking briskly, heels clicking with new purpose. The sooner she got to the extraction point, the sooner she'd be on a flight eastbound. As she disappeared down an alley toward her safe house, the rain began to fall harder, drumming on the cobbles like a quickening heartbeat. Himeno didn't mind the cold droplets that soaked through her coat. She found it refreshing. It was washing away the subterfuge and loneliness of the field. Tokyo was calling her home, calling all of them home. And by God, she would answer. Himeno took out a fresh cigarette and placed it between her lips, unlit for now. Just hold on a little longer, she murmured, as if Aki and the rest could hear her across continents. The anticipation and dread coiled in her stomach, but above all she felt resolve. With a determined stride, she vanished into the night mist, one more shadow among many a shadow racing home to where she belonged, ready to stand with her comrades for whatever came next. Chapter 19, Denji. Denji PSIA Field Agent, South America. A battered pickup truck careened down a muddy jungle road, its cargo bed swaying under the weight of steel crates. Denji grimaced and gunned the engine of his motorcycle, closing in despite the sheets of rain lashing his face. The humid night air tasted of red mud and adrenaline. Palm fronds and branches whipped by in a green blur as he chased the smugglers deeper into the Amazon. Oi, slowpokes! You can't shake me that easy! Denji yelled, though the roaring bike drowned his taunt. He leaned low, dodging a hanging vine by inches. Up ahead, one of the truck's passengers, a burly man with a bandana, clambered onto the cargo bed, wielding what looked like a Pokémon stun rod. The man barked something in Portuguese lost in the storm, then the truck's tailgate banged open, revealing a desperate measure. A large, scaly Arbok slithered out, hissing aggressively. Denji's brown eyes went wide. Seriously, he sputtered, swerving just as the purple cobra Pokémon struck at him with lightning speed. Its fangs scraped the air by his shoulder. Denji could smell the acrid venom even through the rain. Heart pounding, he yanked the bike into a skid, spraying mud. The Arbok reared back on the road, hood flared, ready to lash out again at the headlights cutting through darkness. "All right, ya ugly noodle, round 2. Denji revved the engine with a wild grin. Instead of veering off, he accelerated straight toward the serpent. At the last second, he kicked up on the foot pegs, the bike's front wheel lifted and slammed into the Arbok's chin like a boxing glove. The creature let out a gurgling hiss, recoiling into the undergrowth. Denji whooped triumphantly, even as his bike wobbled dangerously from the stunt. Up ahead, the smuggler in the truck's back looked positively stunned both by the Arbok's abrupt exit and by this crazy kid's audacity. Denji spat rainwater and pushed his bike harder, gears whining. He could just make out the markings on the crates now, black market tech stolen from Japan, likely containing Pokémon or weapon prototypes from the infamous lab theft. Makima had sent him to retrieve them, and he wasn't about to come home empty-handed. The truck's driver must have realized they were out of tricks. Through the haze, Denji saw the vehicle veer onto an old rickety bridge spanning a swollen river. "Oh no you don't," he growled, determination fueling him. He raced onto the bridge right on their tail. The planks thundered under the weight of both vehicles. Suddenly, a flash of movement, the bandana man tossed something over the truck's side. A grenade. Ah, crap! Denji had barely a split second. He braked hard and swerved. The grenade detonated with a deafening boom, obliterating a section of the bridge just as the truck cleared it. The shockwave sent Denji and his motorcycle skidding. Wood and shrapnel flew, the bike's back tire slid out from under him. With a yelp, Denji was thrown clear, tumbling onto the rain-slick boards. His motorcycle spun off and clattered into the churning river below. Pain flared through Denji's ribs, but he was alive. He clawed for purchase on a half-shattered plank as the bridge shuddered. The pickup truck was disappearing around the next bend, its engine noise fading. "Damn it, not good," Denji muttered, scrambling to his feet. He peered over the gaping hole in the bridge at the raging water. No way across here now. He wiped mud and rain from his face, wincing at a bruise forming on his side. Then, as if on cue, the universe handed him a lifeline. A distant roar of helicopter blades approached, slicing through the storm. From the jungle canopy, a black helicopter bearing the PSIA emblem emerged, searchlight cutting a cone through the darkness. Denji recognized it. Backup had finally caught up. The chopper hovered over the broken bridge, and a rope ladder unfurled to within reach. About time. Denji managed a cocky grin despite the pain. Ha! Saved by the bell. He leapt, grabbing the swaying ladder. Rain pelted his bruised body as he hung on, boots dangling above the angry river. 2 PSIA operators crouched in the chopper's open door, hauling him up. As soon as Denji was inside the cabin, he shouted over the rotor noise, "They went north. The bastards have a head start." He was soaked and battered, but undeterred. One of the operators clapped him on the shoulder, "Easy, kid. We'll track 'em." The pilot was already banking to pursue the fleeing smugglers from above. Denji plopped onto a bench seat, catching his breath for the first time in what felt like hours. He brushed dripping hair out of his eyes and suddenly became aware of a frantic beeping from the chopper COMM console. The co-pilot glanced back at him. "You got an HQ recall too, Denji?" Denji blinked. "Recall? Hey!" In the flurry of the chase, he'd ignored the vibration on the secure phone strapped to his belt. Now he yanked it out, perplexed. Sure enough, the screen displayed an emergency priority message. He squinted at the text in the flickering cockpit light. Priority directive: immediate recall, all agents are ordered to return to Tokyo headquarters at once. Code: Homecoming. For a second, Denji wondered if he'd hit his head harder than he thought. Pull everyone back? That never happened. He looked up at the operator, who gave a grim nod of confirmation. It's real. All field ops are aborted as of 5 minutes ago. We're heading home, kid. Home. Tokyo. Denji's first reaction was a swirl of excitement. He'd get to see Makima again. Despite the rain's chill, warmth flooded his chest at the thought of her. If she wanted everyone back, it had to be something huge. Maybe she needed him for a critical fight. He liked the sound of that. But as the adrenaline of battle ebbed, another feeling crept in: worry. If things were so bad that even this mission was being scrapped, then the situation in Japan must be life or death. Denji frowned, tapping his foot impatiently on the chopper floor. So we're just letting those creeps go? He asked, frustration evident. The co-pilot shrugged apologetically. Orders. We have to pull out. Locals will have to pick up the chase. Denji clicked his tongue in annoyance. He hated leaving a job undone. It felt like losing. Still, Makima's orders were absolute in his book. If she said come home, he'd come sprinting. He thumbed a reply on his phone. Denji received. Returning to base. As he sent it, Denji couldn't help a sharp-toothed grin forming. He could already imagine bursting into HQ, drenched in mud, and bragging about how he drop-kicked a giant snake off a bike. Power would be so jealous. And Aki would probably scold him for being reckless but would secretly be glad he was okay. The helicopter veered southward, beginning the long journey back to a makeshift airstrip. Denji gazed out through the open door at the endless jungle rolling by beneath. A strange thrill stirred in him. This recall wasn't the end of the action, no, it was the start of something even bigger. Finally, the main event, he murmured, tightening his grip on a ceiling strap as thunder rumbled in the distance. Despite exhaustion tugging at his limbs, Denji felt an electric excitement. Whatever awaited in Tokyo, whatever enemy or challenge, he'd face it head-on, together with the others. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the ragtag team that had become his family. Makima, Aki, Power, Himeno, Kobani, even grumpy old Kishive. They'd all be there. Denji chuckled to himself. Hope they got good food ready at HQ, he muttered. His stomach growled. Right on cue, beating up smugglers and riding through storms really worked up an appetite. As the chopper carried him off toward the city lights far beyond the horizon, Denji allowed himself to relax. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto the floor, forming a tiny puddle at his feet. He was going home. Whatever it was that Makima needed, whatever threat loomed, he'd protect them all. That chainsaw heart of his, as Himeno used to tease, was revving up for the fight. Denji cracked his knuckles and flashed a feral grin at the dark sky outside. Tokyo, here I come, he whooped into the night, the sound swallowed by the thrum of the rotors and the storm. Chapter 20, Power. Power PSIA Field Agent, North Africa. Under a blazing North African sun, a dusty compound smoldered from the aftermath of a fierce skirmish. Power strode out from a blown-out doorway, dragging a cowering thug by the collar with one hand and clutching a very pleased orange tabby cat in the other. Anyone else want to try me? She shouted, flashing a manic grin around the courtyard. A half-dozen other gunmen lay incapacitated on the ground, groaning in pain as local soldiers rounded them up. Power's white blonde hair was tied in a high, messy ponytail streaked with soot, and her desert camo field shirt was splattered with grime and a fair bit of someone else's blood. Not that she cared. She was riding the high of victory. With a triumphant laugh, she tossed the thug aside into the arms of an approaching soldier. Take that, you smelly camels, she crowed, planting her boot on a fallen rebel's AK-47 and striking a pose as if she were on the cover of a comic book. One of the local military officers, a stern man who had initially balked at taking orders from a brash young woman codenamed Power, approached her, shaking his head in equal parts disbelief and admiration. "Miss Power, the compound is secure. We've retrieved the stolen technology and all the Pokémon too," he reported, eyeing the content cat now purring in Power's arms. The soldiers had indeed recovered cages of illegally modified Pokémon from the warlord's stash. A few curious creatures peeked out from their crates at the commotion. "Of course it's secure," Power boasted loudly, giving the officer a sharp-toothed grin. "It was easy peasy. Those fools never stood a chance against me." She scratched the cat under its chin, her tone softening oddly. "Meowie here scared good too, didn't you, fearless warrior?" The cat, freshly rescued from the compound, meowed in agreement, or perhaps just for more chin scratches. Power strutted across the courtyard, the adrenaline of battle still pulsing through her veins. Honestly, she was a bit disappointed it had ended so quickly. These so-called elite smugglers and mercenaries had been no fun at all. Barely a scratch on her. She'd have to embellish the story later, maybe tell Denji that she took down 50 men single-handedly, who'd contradict her, anyway. As she contemplated how many imaginary foes to add to her tally, a satellite phone began ringing from her discarded gear pile near a sandbag wall. The ringtone, a loud, obnoxious rock anthem, was impossible to ignore. "Hey? What now?" Power muttered. She scooped up the phone, still cradling the cat in one arm. On the screen flashed Makima's caller ID. Power's eyes narrowed slightly. Makima rarely called her directly, usually it was some handler or Aki giving her missions to avoid Makima's wrath. A call from Makima herself meant something serious. Power jabbed the answer button and barked, "What? I'm busy celebrating my glorious victory." The officer nearby winced at her lack of decorum. Makima's cool voice flowed through the phone, undeterred. "Power. Drop whatever you're doing. It's time to come home. All agents are being recalled to Tokyo immediately." Power blinked, momentarily speechless, a rare event in itself. She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at it as if it might elaborate on those terse words. The cat in her other arm yawned, unimpressed by the drama. Makima's voice, still on the line, added, "This is an order. Confirm you understand." Power huffed, bringing the phone back. Yeah, I heard you." "Geez," she grumbled. She waved a hand dismissively even though Makima couldn't see it. "I ain't deaf. So you really need me back? Finally realized you can't do anything without the great power, hey?" There was a hint of smug satisfaction in her tone. On the other end, Makima allowed a brief sigh. "Just get on the next transport, Power. And, good work today." The line clicked off, leaving Power standing there with an open mouth, whether from the abrupt hang-up or the unexpected praise, even she wasn't sure. "Ha! Of course it was good work," Power proclaimed to no one in particular, recovering quickly. She tucked the phone away and looked down at Meowie the cat. "Hear that? They're begging me to come back. Probably scared without me." The cat simply blinked lazily. The local officer approached cautiously. "Miss Power, was that a recall from your headquarters?" he ventured, having caught snippets. "We can arrange a helicopter to the airfield. But what about the remaining intel analysis here?" Power shrugged, already marching off to retrieve her discarded blood-spattered jacket. "Not my problem anymore. Big boss calls, I answer. Besides," she added with a devilish grin, "I've already done the fun part. Paperwork is for losers like Aki." She gently deposited Meowie into the arms of a bewildered young soldier. "Take care of my fierce beast until I get back," she ordered. The soldier nodded dumbly as the cat curled up purring against his chest. Power stretched her arms above her head, feeling the pops in her shoulders. Honestly, a part of her was thrilled. She wouldn't admit it out loud, but she'd started to miss Tokyo, the neon lights, the convenience store fried chicken, yelling at Denji over trivial things, even Aki's constant nagging. And if everyone was being recalled, that meant all her favorite people, and sparring partners, would be gathered in one place again. As she hopped into the back of an awaiting military jeep, Power pulled out her phone one more time. Her thumb hovered as she considered texting Denji some outrageous lie, "I fought 1,000 terrorists, perhaps," but decided against it. She'd much rather brag in person and see his face. Instead, she fired off a quick confirmation to Makama's directive, "Power, fine, I'm coming." No one told Power her confirmations had to be formal. Almost immediately, an acknowledgement ping came back from HQ. The jeep's engine revved and sped out of the compound, kicking up a cloud of golden sand. Power stood tall in the back, one hand gripping the roll bar, hair whipping in the desert wind. She whooped at a few villagers, cheering the departure in their eyes. She was probably some kind of action hero. "Ha, damn right!" Power hollered, basking in the adulation, real or imagined. "Make way for the almighty Power, savior of cats and crusher of evil." As the convoy headed toward the horizon, Power felt a surge of anticipation she hadn't felt in a long time. A homecoming usually meant boring debriefs, but this was different. The air itself felt charged with the promise of a showdown. She could practically smell the trouble brewing, or maybe that was just the lingering gunpowder. Either way, she was ready. Tokyo wouldn't know what hit it when Power returned, and woe betide any enemy foolish enough to stand in their way. Chapter 21, Hirokazu Ere. Hirokazu Ere, PSIA Field Agent, South Asia. Night had settled over a bustling bazaar in South Asia, but Hirokazu Ere remained perched on a dilapidated rooftop, camera in hand. Through the lens, he tracked a pair of silhouettes meeting in a narrow alley below. Two high-profile targets, a corrupt ex-official and a known trafficker, were exchanging a briefcase of cash for what Ere suspected were stolen Pokémon gene samples. He zoomed in, heart pounding as he snapped frame after frame of photographic evidence. "Don't screw this up." Are's own silent mantra looped in his head. A bead of sweat trickled down from his temple. He wiped it away carefully, not daring to move too abruptly. The corrugated metal roof under him creaked with each tiny shift of his weight. One wrong noise and the men below might look up. He swallowed, forcing himself to breathe steadily. Surveillance wasn't normally this nerve-wracking in training. But out here, alone in a foreign city with nothing but his wits and a telephoto lens, Ere felt every bit the rookie he still was. Part of him wished Kobani or Himeno were here. They always had a calming presence. Even if Kobani panicked externally, at least he didn't feel so alone in terror. But Himeno was half a world away, and Kobani somewhere in a jungle. "Focus, Hirokazu." Below, the trafficker cracked open a metal case, revealing vials that glinted under a dim street light. Are's finger pressed the shutter repeatedly. Got it. The handoff was being documented clear as day. If he could just... Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from an adjacent building, a stack of crates knocked over by some clumsy passerby. Both targets snapped their heads up, eyes darting across the rooftops. Are's breath hitched. He shrank back behind the low parapet, body flat against the tin roofing. "Please don't see me, please don't see me," he prayed, muscles tense to bolt if necessary. Voices drifted from the alley, terse, suspicious. Ere dared to peek and saw the two men hastily parting ways. Deal aborted. Damn. He'd gotten proof of the meeting but not the actual trade. Close, but not a complete success. As the ex-official scurried off into the labyrinth of streets, the trafficker lingered, scanning the rooftops. Ere kept his head down, cursing his luck. If only he had backup. His pocket vibrated. The sudden buzz nearly made him yelp. He fumbled for his phone, pulse skyrocketing at the worst possible timing. The screen's glow illuminated his face as he cupped a hand over it. It was an encrypted message from PSIA Command Priority 1. Are's stomach flipped. Not now. He tapped it open, eyes darting between the phone and the alley. The trafficker was still pacing warily. Eri read the message twice in disbelief. Operation Homecoming, all agents return to Tokyo at once. Cease current missions. Immediate effect. His mouth went dry. All agents, immediate. The words swirled in his mind. This had to be unprecedented. He peeked over the parapet again. The alley was empty now. The trafficker had melted away into the night, likely spooked by the noise. His mission here was effectively over anyway. Still, Eri felt a pang of frustration. He hadn't gotten the final proof, his perfectionist streak gnawed at him. But then he recalled the somber meeting months ago after the betrayal, Makima's steely resolve as she briefed the remaining loyal members. When the time comes, we regroup, she had said, voice brooking no argument. That time was now, clearly. Eri exhaled shakily, relief and anxiety swirling inside him. Relief, because heading home meant he could get out of this tense solo stakeout alive. Anxiety, because whatever crisis required calling everyone back had to be monumental. He gathered his equipment quickly, hands trembling a bit as he disassembled the long camera lens. Before climbing down, he tapped out a response on the phone. Eri understood. Returning to Tokyo. As he descended an exterior ladder to street level, Eri's mind raced ahead. He thought of his colleagues: bold Denji, boisterous Power, stoic Aki, kind Himeno, nervous Kobani, even brooding Angel. They'd all be converging on Tokyo, like a family returning home. Despite the circumstances, Eri felt a tiny spark of warmth in his chest at that thought. He hadn't seen any of them in months. How much had changed? Would they still see him as the greenhorn of the bunch? He dropped onto the quiet street and began blending into the bazaar's late-night foot traffic. In the distance, neon signs flickered above market stalls selling spices and knockoff electronics. The normalcy of it all contrasted with the turmoil in his head. As he hurried toward the safe house to rendezvous for extraction, Eri allowed himself a rare moment of bravery in his thoughts. This is it. The big one. If Makima and Hiroshi, he still could barely fathom that the legendary agent was back, were rallying them, it was for something that could make or break all they'd worked for. Eri puffed out his cheeks and exhaled, trying to dispel his nerves. Himeno's voice echoed in memory, gentle but firm, "You're stronger than you think, Hirokazu." He straightened his back, adjusting the strap of his gear bag. Maybe he was. He'd survived gunfights and devil ambushes, back when devils were their concern, and plenty of grueling training days under Kishive's watch. He could handle whatever came next. He had to for their sake. Turning a corner, Eri caught sight of the extraction van arriving, headlights flashing briefly. He broke into a jog. As he did, he whispered to himself, "Let's go, Hirokazu. Time to go home and show them what you're made of." The night breeze was warm on his face, carrying with it the sense of curry and car exhaust. It smelled like life moving on, even as his own life was about to be uprooted and flung back to Tokyo. Fear lingered in the pit of his stomach, but a newfound determination steadied his steps. He was going back to his team, back where he wasn't alone. Whatever awaited in Tokyo, traitors, monsters, even the end of the world, Eri would stand with them. Maybe he wasn't the strongest or the bravest, but he would do his part. Hirokazu. Eri disappeared into the ebb and flow of the bazaar crowd, one more traveler heading home under the neon-tinted night, ready to face the storm alongside his friends. Chapter 22, Angel. Angel PSIA Field Agent, Central Africa. Dusk painted the sky in blood orange hues over a savanna in Central Africa. In the remains of a conflict-scarred village, Angel sat atop the crumbled wall of what used to be a schoolhouse. He absent-mindedly tossed a bullet casing between his gloved hands, listening to the distant pops of gunfire still echoing from beyond the hills. Another day, another battleground that hardly seemed to change anything. Around him, humanitarian aid workers and UN peacekeepers moved about tending to the wounded and corralling frightened villagers onto trucks for evacuation. Angel's role here was unofficial, just another security consultant who happened to be exactly where PSIA needed eyes and ears. His sharp gaze watched as a medic rushed by carrying a limp child. Angel's chest tightened at the sight, but his expression remained detached, almost bored behind his tousled auburn hair. "This war's never going to end," he murmured to himself in Japanese, so softly only he could hear. He hopped off the wall, dusting off his pants. A twinge of pain shot through his left leg where a graze from earlier still bled through a bandage. It would heal, they always did. Physical injuries weren't what weighed on him. Earlier that afternoon, he had slipped behind rebel lines to verify whispers of Pokémon-enhanced weaponry being used by mercenaries. Sure enough, he'd found evidence, the charred remains of what had once been a Houndour, genetically modified into a living incendiary bomb by some twisted science. Angel had ended its suffering, then radioed his findings to